Alright, are we ready to go yet? I'm not even sure if I'm ready to go yet. Been a busy morning so far. However, I think everything is good. I think it's all good. So, we're going to go ahead and get started on this because we have a lot to cover today. And I'm expecting a package delivery like right in the middle of this, so I may have to disappear later on for like, I don't know, 3 minutes? Maybe less? We'll find out at that time. Because I know about when it's coming, but I'm not sure when exactly it's coming. So, we're going to go ahead, we're going to get started on this. I'm going to make the starting soon go away now. There it goes. And just say, hello! ShadowKatt back with my first, the first show that I didn't really want to do, okay? Let me make one thing clear. If you wanted to go watch some kind of news recap kind of show, news variety show, commentary kind of thing, I can literally recommend you a dozen different shows better than this one. You know, shows that people actually watch. Because I never really wanted to do that. However, the entire reason why I did my direct messages and I eventually just kind of folded it over into this live stream format is because I do listen to those commentary shows, and when I listen to people talking and discussing and debating topics, there are times, and I'm sure that anybody who has listened to podcasts before, where I find myself just screaming at the screen because they're missing something. Something that I feel is obvious, and maybe it is obvious. Maybe they're wrong, maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong, and I'm just screaming into the ether because no one deserves to hear me. No one should be punished like that. But either way, now I have my own show here, and yeah, this is my opportunity to scream. So, that's what we're going to do today, and already I see that I have people in the chat. Hello Flame, hello Blizz, hello JP, it's good to have you here. We have a busy day ahead of us. How busy day do we have ahead of us? Let me show you. I'm actually organized today. And I have not taken my Ritalin. So let's go ahead and get that up. And we'll move it up here where it can be properly seen. And maybe even make that bigger, because that's kind of hard to see. So let's go ahead and just go bigger, 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 bigger? Bigger, yes. Alright, there we go. So this is what we're going to cover today. I've got this broken up into 5 distinct blocks, and I'm going to try and limit myself to roughly a half an hour-ish per topic. That way we're not here literally all day, because wow, I could literally do this all day. But primarily, the thing that I want to talk about today is empathy and abstraction, which is the idea of being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Specifically, I've talked about this before, but I want to tell you about how to do it. Because I can come through and say, we should have empathy, we should be able to understand other people's points of view and how they feel about things, but I never actually talked about how you do that. And that's a bit of a problem, because you can tell people that they can do all kinds of things. Like, when I had a car, you should tell me that I should probably take care of my brakes better. That's wonderful. I don't know how to change brakes. So if you don't know how to do something and somebody's expecting you to do it, then, well, it's just a recipe for disaster. So we're going to cover that first. Then I want to talk about some of the news that came from the week, because there's things that are happening that I feel like no one's really talking about. And you got to understand that when I look at things, I am a lifelong chess player. So when I look at events going on, I don't necessarily care about the things that are happening right now, because there's nothing I can do about them. I mean, what is history is history. It's happened, it's done. What is happening now is inevitable. It's a bit like saying there's a boulder rolling down a hill. Now, if we had known that this boulder was going to roll downhill before it started rolling, maybe we could have moved the boulder. Maybe we could have braced the boulder. Maybe we could put up a wall or something. either way, there were things that we could have done and we didn't do them. Presently, the boulder is rolling. And can the boulder be stopped? Yes, it can be. But it's going to take exponentially more energy to stop it now than it would have before it started rolling. It's not impossible, but it's impractical and infeasible. Instead, we can say the boulder is rolling and it will get down the hill in X amount of time. What can we do to prevent further damage in the future? Is the boulder rolling down a hill and there's people in the way? Can we get the people out of the way? Can we divert the path of it somehow? Can we put up a makeshift barrier to disperse the energy and lessen the impact? I care more about what we can do now for the future. Because what's already going on now is basically unstoppable. And that's why when I look at the things that are happening right now, I look to the future and say, what are the further on consequences of this and what can we do about that? So, without further ado, why don't we get started on this? And I want to start talking about empathy and abstraction because we're going to need some of this later on in today's discussion. Now, for empathy and abstraction, first off, I needed to go ahead and get a definition for empathy. Because if you're going to talk about a topic, you need to have a good foundation for what your topic is. And in this case, we're talking about empathy. So I went back to ChatGPT and I told ChatGPT, do this for me. I would like you to gather up 10 different definitions. And I've done this before with ChatGPT, it works very well. Get me 10 definitions for the word empathy, and then summarize all 10 of them into a single definition. And this is what it gave me. It says that empathy is the capacity to understand, share, and feel the emotions, thoughts, and experiences of others, allowing one to connect with their perspective, show compassion, and respond with care and understanding. Now, empathy is very important in a civilized society. This goes back to what they said in Christianity was the golden rule, which was simply to say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We can go back to the 10 Commandments, many of them at least, when we discuss the golden rule. For example, thou shalt not murder. Okay, we can all agree that murder is bad in a general sense, but think about the real crux of why murder is bad. You don't want to be murdered. You don't want your friends and family to be murdered. You don't want your pets to be murdered. Or I guess slaughtered in that case. You wouldn't want these things done to you, ergo you should not do them to other people. The same thing goes with stealing. You would not want your things taken. You would not want your friends and family's things taken. You should not be doing this either. And so it really comes down to the fact of, I would feel bad if this was done to me. How would somebody else feel if I did that to them? And thus we have the root of empathy. They would feel bad, therefore I should feel bad about making them feel bad. Okay? That is empathy at its very most basic. But empathy goes further than that. It's not just things that I would feel bad about. Perhaps I shouldn't do these things to other people because I would feel bad if it was done to me. It's also a bridge in order to understand people who are not like you. A good example, what would be a good example? There's actually many good examples. I'm just having a hard time wording it right now. Just anybody with a different kind of perspective than you. I mean, let's say, I know, here's a really good example. Very simple too. Even a child should understand this one. You have a favorite color, okay? Let's say your favorite color is red, okay? So when you go to buy clothes, you look at the you look at the clothing on the rack and you say, I want to get a red shirt and a red skirt, okay? Red's your favorite color. If you want to get a car, maybe you get a red car. If you get a bike, maybe you get a red bike. You like red, okay? But you hate green. Okay? You see a green shirt on the rack and you're like, ew, no, why? You meet somebody else, though, their favorite color is green. And so they want to get a green shirt and a green skirt and a green car and a green bike and a green house. And you look at them and you're like, ew, what's wrong with you? Okay. And that's a perfectly fine knee-jerk reaction, but this is where empathy comes in, because we can understand, and this is a very basic thing, that, you don't like green, but perhaps they do. You get joy from having red things. You can put yourself into their perspective and say, if green was my favorite color, and I was surrounded by all of these things that were my favorite color, then I would be happy about that. Now, of course, I would be miserable if I was personally in a green area, but I can understand how that would make you feel. Now, this is where abstraction comes in. Abstraction, something that is abstract, is removed from reality. It is removed from the concrete. This is why many people have difficulty with things like algebra, or trigonometry sometimes, or calculus. Because many people, most people, have no problem doing math when it comes to numbers. But when you put into the equation variables like letters, symbols, things like that, you're now dealing with abstract concepts that many people struggle with. And this is one of the reasons why I think empathy is so difficult for many people, because it is hard to remove yourself from everything tangible to you and adopt something that is completely foreign. Much like many people have a hard time reading an equation that is simply x plus 2 because they see the x and they don't understand that x can be a myriad of things. It's hard to look at somebody else's values and feel what they do towards those values. A very simple example of this is a religious one. When you look at Christianity, Christianity has a certain set of values, principles, and tenets. In Christianity, they believe that Christ is the Savior, that Christ is the literal Son of God, that everything he said was the literal Word of God, and that when Christ was killed, he took on all the sins upon of the world unto himself, and died for that. That is, of course, the Christian theology. Then, of course, you have the Muslim theology. And under Islam, Christ was just a person. Just another Christian who happened to be crucified by the Romans. He wasn't special. He wasn't unique. And the things that he said, while they may have resonated with people, were blasphemous. Because there was only one man who carried the word of Allah, and that was Muhammad. And only Muhammad should be revered. Now, these two things are diametrically opposed, and bloody wars have been fought over it in both directions. In order to really find common ground, though, to find peace between this, you would have to either agree to disagree, which means that you're not going to fight about it, but you're also not going to talk about it, or you have to find some kind of common ground between them. And this is where empathy and abstraction comes in. To put yourself as a Christian in the shoes of the Muslim and say, what if I was the one who believed in Muhammad? And what if somebody was saying that my prophet was false? How would I feel about that? Or for the Muslim to say, I understand that Muhammad is the prophet, but what if I was the Christian and my entire faith revolved around this person, and I had an entire group of Islamists telling me that my holy figure was literally nothing? This, of course, is the root of abstraction. This putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else. And this is important at every single juncture in your life. All of them. Going back to the idea of a favorite color. This is something that children need to learn. Because every child is going to have a favorite color. Unless you're like me and your favorite color tended to change on a daily basis, but that notwithstanding, every child needs to learn that, I have a favorite color and they have a favorite color, and just because their favorite color is different than mine, it does not make it wrong. It just makes it different. And I should be able to appreciate that difference, to understand that difference. It does not mean that I need to adopt their favorite color as my own. I can listen to their arguments and they can tell me why they think it is. Perhaps their favorite color is purple, and it reminds them of grapes, because they love grapes. Or maybe plums, or maybe they saw a purple butterfly once, and that became their favorite color then. We can have reasons, and we can discuss these reasons. And we can, again, as I said, find common ground there. As we grow older, we need to learn these other things because people's differences move beyond just simply their favorite colors. People will have different hobbies. They'll have different taste in music. They will have different religious views. They'll have different personal views. They'll have different political views. As you get older and you need to make friends and find romantic partners, you will have bridges that you will need to cross with people. As a matter of fact, when you go into relationship counseling, this is one of the big things that people will work on, because many cases of relationship problems come to a breakdown in these things. Your partner does something that you absolutely cannot stand. Maybe they cook fish on a regular basis and you hate fish. I hate fish. And believe me, there is nothing I hate more than when somebody in my household is cooking fish, because fish stinks. And it fills every single corner of the house with that aroma. It is the most awful thing ever. But I understand that they like fish. Okay? And there are things that I do that annoy and frustrate them too. But we all have our reasons for doing things. And so finding that common ground is important. This also continues as you get older, you get into the workforce, because you will need to work with coworkers. You'll need to work with managers and supervisors and things like that. If you get into politics, you'll need to work with senators and congresspeople. If you go into things like the clergy, then you'll need to deal with pastors, cardinals, reverends, all those things above you. Finding or being able to adopt another viewpoint and understand things from those perspectives is important, because if you can't, then it's going to be very difficult for you to get along in the world. As a matter of fact, we do have people like that. I would point you to, according to the DSM, okay, according to psychology, the idea of the sociopath and the psychopath. Both of these things are they're very close together. They do have some differentiations. It's kind of like a Venn diagram where all psychopaths are sociopaths, but not all sociopaths are psychopaths. One is just kind of the more extreme version of another. But the one key thing that both of them have in common is both of them have an incapability of expressing empathy towards other people. There is something wrong in their brain that they are unable to connect with other human beings in that way. And while many people who have this issue, especially if they have gotten some kind of therapy, some kind of counseling about this, and they recognize that they have this gap, they can regulate their behavior and their reactions to the world to get along in a fairly normal, to us, way. It's a bit like, to put this in context that a normal person could understand. A normal person understands the idea of having empathy and courtesy towards other people. The sociopath does not. To put this in terms that a normal person could understand, it would be the equivalent of saying that every person walking through a door must snap their fingers. Why? We don't know. We don't understand why every person walking through the door must snap their fingers, but it's what we as a people do. You don't get it, but everybody else seems to. That's a bit what it's like to be a sociopath. You may not understand why people do the things they do, but with a bit of counseling and therapy, you can understand that these are the things that normal people do, and so going along to get along is helpful. For the rest of us, however, we can easily understand that we do these courteous things, we have empathy for people just because this is how we keep a cohesive culture. So this is the crux of the entire empathy and abstraction conversation that I wanted to get into because it's going to be very important as we move on. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up is because I have conversations almost on the daily about politics and about things that are going on in the government, in the world, all of these things. And one of the things that constantly comes up time after time after time is people saying that they're doing this and they shouldn't be doing this. We talk about this with politicians all the time. Because all of us know that politicians in general are corrupt. Many of them go into the job with the best of intentions. Some of them go into the job corrupt. But over time, almost every single person who is in that for long enough becomes corrupted by it in some way. And I tell people that when they question this, they say, I don't understand how they got to this point. I don't understand how things got this far. I say, try to see things from their perspective. You don't have to agree with their perspective, but try to see it from their perspective. Perhaps they are a good person in a bad situation trying to do good things. Many times in human history, we have done deals with bad people thinking that we could control what was going to happen for a better outcome. Usually that backfires spectacularly. However, sometimes it has worked in our favor. A good example that comes to mind is the mafia. Okay? Generally speaking, almost every single person, including the people in the mafia, would agree that the mafia are bad people. Okay? Sometimes they might say that they're a necessary evil, but in general, they are evil people. They do bad things. They literally lie, cheat, steal, and murder. It's kind of their MO. The same thing could also be said of other groups like the Yakuza. And these are both really good examples because when we go into history and we look at what they've done in World War II, I don't actually have anything to back this up, but I heard that in World War II, the mafia was tasked by the US government with the movement of supplies when German ships were busy just torpedoing anything that had a hull. And I do know for a fact, because I saw the stories when it came out, that during COVID in Italy, when COVID was first starting and Italy was literally closing off its borders and people were starving because, I mean, with closed borders, Italy wasn't getting food. The supermarkets were bare. The mafia, specifically I think it was the Sicilian mafia, but I could be wrong about that. It's not important. Actually ran the blockades to bring food to the Italian citizens. Now, was this generosity? Partially. I mean, let's face it. If you're already bad guys, having a good veneer over the bad guy image isn't going to hurt you. The same thing is true of the Yakuza over in Japan. The Yakuza are undoubtedly a brutal mob. And they have a very long history of doing very bad things. However, generally speaking, when there is a disaster in Japan, and given what and where Japan is, they have many disasters, volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, things like that. The Yakuza are almost always one of the first relief groups on the scene. And even more than that, they go incognito. They will cover up all of their tattoos, they hide their faces, they wear masks and hats, and they bring food, they bring water, they bring clothing, everything. They bring it in, they distribute it, and then they vanish. Like dust in the wind. They did the good and they left. And so, even though they hide themselves, everybody knows it's them. So, can we look at what they're doing and say, can we adopt their perspective and say, are they doing the good thing? Are they doing it for the right reasons? We can. But we can also understand that they do these things maybe for duplicitous reasons. This is where having empathy and abstraction comes in handy, because we can see that people will do bad things for good reasons. And we can appreciate what they've done, even if the consequences of it may be worse. We can also use empathy and abstraction to take a look at somebody who is genuinely corrupt and say, how could they be doing this? Well, it's actually very simple. If they're doing this and it's benefiting them in some way, maybe that's all they care about. I mean, it's entirely possible somebody can do something for entirely selfish reasons. You can put yourself in their perspective and say, if I were in their perspective and I were doing this, what would be my reasons for doing it? Is it helping my family? Maybe. Is it helping my friends? Maybe. Is it just helping me? Also maybe. We don't know. But by adopting their perspective, then maybe we can work through it. And this will help us to bridge many of those gaps, even if we don't want to cross that bridge. Just having it there is progress. And progress is good. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this one out because I'm running along on time for this topic. But we'll go ahead, we'll paint that in green, and we're going to move on. Now, we're going to move on to the next topic, the Great Canadian Firewall. And this is a topic that I wanted to bring up because... No, I actually want to leave that there. Leave that there. I saw news earlier this week about Bill C-18 coming out. And generally speaking, whenever there's a bill coming out of Canada, it's usually bad. Unfortunately. So I listened to some of what it was, and I didn't entirely understand what was going on, but I understood enough to talk about it, because shortly before, we had Bill C-11. And when we talk about Bill C-11, this is where I've got a few, I got a few actual demonstrations. So let's see if I got this working. Let's bring that down to where it... No, don't do that. This is a professional operation, people. So we're going to bring this down here, and we're going to talk Bill C-11. So let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. So what is Bill C-11? Bill C-11, which did pass, okay? This was introduced a while ago, and it did pass. Also known as the Online Streaming Act, is the updated version of Bill C-10, first introduced last year. Spearheaded, Okay, so Bill C-11 expands the Broadcasting Act that grants the CRTC, which I'm not exactly sure what that stands for. It's probably in here somewhere. Regulatory powers over radio and television to cover all audio-visual content on the internet, including content on platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and podcast clients. Under Bill C-11, all platforms hosting audiovisual content that are not specifically excluded must make financial contributions to producing officially recognized CanCon, currently defined by the 1980s era point system built around legacy media. So, does the system support Canadian storytelling? Unevenly at best. In recent years, productions about Trump and English tutors have been greenlit as CanCon, while lavish productions of iconically Canadian stories like The Handmaid's Tale and Turning Red have not yet met standards. Under Bill C-11, platforms must also make CanCon discoverable by filling our feeds and search results with mandatory quota of official CanCon. I believe that's Canadian content, actually. That would make sense. So that would be Canadian content. Content? Alright, CanCon content. Or face stiff financial penalties from the CRTC. CanCon support largely excludes small and digital-first Canadian content creators, while BC11 instructs the CRTC to review CanCon definitions. There is little guidance on how to do so, and no certainty for when it will complete its review, or blah 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 blah. The important thing here is, if I had to summarize it, what they're basically saying is, for Canadians in Canada, if you want to go on television, if you want to go on the radio, if you want to go on the internet to wherever you're going, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, podcasts, all of this stuff, what they're supposed to be doing is you have an algorithm that says, we want to feed you what you're most interested in. If you are interested in cooking shows, they want to feed you more cooking shows. If you're interested in hunting, they want to send you more hunting shows, things of this nature. What C11 was instructing is for all of these different platforms, the addition of these into everything else is to put their thumb on the scale and feed you only Canadian things first. It does not explicitly say that you can't see other things. But if you have 20 search results for something, you want to see a cooking show, they want to say that there's 20 search results for it. The first 10 have to be Canadian. I need a drink real quick. Hold on a second. Water. Very good. So that's what C11 does. And when C11 came out, a lot of people were very, very concerned because they said, hold on, if I'm, if I'm talking about Canadian politics, like say I am right now, but I'm not Canadian, does that mean that I'm just going to get buried? And the answer to that is, yes, you are going to get buried. Or if you were a Canadian gamer and you wanted to see game content, it might mean that the content you're looking for gets buried under a whole bunch of other Canadian content creators because that's what they want to see instead. So maybe you want to watch Fortnite, okay? However, there's a whole bunch of bigger Canadian content creators and they all play Minecraft. Well, guess what you're getting fed, because they're all Canadian first, and there aren't nearly as many Canadian Fortnite people. And so people are just like, well, what is the point of this? And I don't like this. Well, of course, they say the point is to keep Canadian content relevant in Canada. That's why it was suggested by the Canadian Heritage Minister. It's all about keeping Canada Canadian. And while this is actually an admirable thing to do, the way they're going about doing it isn't right. If you want somebody to do something, you should incentivize it, not force it. If you have to force it, then you're probably doing something wrong in the first place. So that happened already, and this already passed. So what do we have now? Now we have Bill C-18. So Bill C-18 is the Canada's Online News Act. Now what this is kind of an expansion on what C-11 was already doing. Well, C-11 said that you need to, at least in Canada, promote anything Canadian to people. Now what's happening is they're going after news. Simply explained, you go onto Facebook, okay? You go onto Facebook, and if you are Canadian adjacent, For example, I know Canadians, I follow Canadians sometimes, and every once in a while if I'm browsing Facebook, or if I'm browsing YouTube or things like this, I will come across articles or videos or such from the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. Literally their state-funded media. So you don't get much more Canadian news than that. Actually, you get half the Canadian news from that because they ignore all the stuff that they don't like. But regardless, every once in a while I will come across something from the CBC, and I can read the headline on Facebook and say, am I interested in this article? If I am, I can click on it and follow that back to the CBC website, or I can just look at the headline and just say, not interested, and scroll on, as you do. What Canada's Online News Act is doing, however, is they're trying to say that this is actually harmful to Canada. The point being, if you go to a place like the CBC, and I don't have the CBC pulled up right now, but if you've ever been to a news site at all, generally speaking, they all look the same. Across the top of the screen is the banner. And that will have their logo and a banner background, and sometimes they'll have ads up there. And the center of the screen will be kind of like a newspaper. It'll have all of your articles, pictures, videos, things like that. And on the sides, you will have these little wings, and these will have a variety of things. They will have things like menus, lists, and ads. And the ads are what's important right here, because ads are money. Now, you might only get 1/1000th of a cent, or I guess 1/1000th of a nickel if you're in Canada, because they don't have cents anymore, in every sense of the word, but tish. But anyway, ads are money, and if you're not going there to see the ads, they're not getting any money. Similarly, I don't know if the CBC does this, but many news sources will paywall their content, meaning that you have to go there and pay them money if you want to see what's in the news today. Well, if that gets ported to a place like Facebook, you can at least see things like the headlines for whatever might be paywalled, and then you can determine whether you want to go see it or not. Sometimes even you'll get around those paywalls going through places like YouTube, where you can get somebody who will review the article or show the article or whatever, or sometimes you'll get them archived and you can see them through the archive. There's other ways around these paywalls, and you can get there through places like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, what have you. And the Canadian government has finally had enough, and so they have submitted Bill C-18, which is ordering that places like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Threads now, assuming that Threads is still alive by the time this live stream goes out. Is Threads still alive? I don't know. It's basically like a deformed infant that was born without lungs, because it's not going to make it very long. But anyway, they are threatening all of these platforms that they need to pay these Canadian institutions for every single appearance of their news on their platform. So every single time you're scrolling through Facebook and you see something from the CBC or from the Quebec Star or the Ontario Sun or whatever it happens to be, I don't even know if those are actual news sources. I mean, probably if you look hard enough. But every time you see something from them, Facebook owes them a nickel, or however much money it happens to be. Of course, this went over like a lead balloon, because as soon as they told all these platforms that they would need to pay them for showing their or for the people on their platforms showing the news, many of these platforms just said, okay, fine. If that's the way you want to play it, then we're not going to show anything. As in, we will block your content anywhere outside of Canada. It won't be enough that your stuff just will not show up. People will not be able to get to the CBC through Twitter. I don't know if they went so far as to actually ban like the CBC's Twitter handle, but you just can't see them outside of Canada. Meaning that the only way you're going to actually see the CBC is if you go there directly. You could go to Twitter and go to the CBC Twitter handle and follow that back to their website. But that will be the only way you're going to get back there. Okay? So that's roughly what Bill C-18 is. And so if we come back here, we can go ahead and we'll greenlight these. So that's a pretty good summary. I hope it was a good summary. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of a jump in a different direction, but there's a reason for it. And trust me, we're going to get there. That is Trudeau. Now, a lot of this stuff is being proposed by people who are not Trudeau, but you have to realize that Trudeau is, of course, the Prime Minister of Canada, and he's got a hand in pretty much every single person who has some act or some position of prominence inside of Canada, including probably the Heritage Minister. Now, this is a story from way back in early 2022, where Justin Trudeau says that he admires China's dictatorship. Now, what his reasons were for saying that, I don't entirely know. I didn't read this, but the fact is that he did say it. I have heard him say it in excerpts. And even if he admires their dictatorship just because he thinks that China is a well-oiled machine and well-ordered society, that is still not a good reason to say he admires their dictatorship. But he says right here, quote, "There is a level of admiration I have for China because of their basic dictatorship, allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say we need to go green because we need to start, investing in solar," Trudeau told a group of women. "There is a flexibility that I know the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, must dream about. Having a dictatorship where you can do whatever you wanted. That I find quite interesting." Okay, so there's your context. I don't need to spell it out any further. You have it there in his own transcribed words. Now, if you don't believe that and you think that it was transcribed wrong, that's on you. You can be skeptical. But, yeah. Also, Tux is in the chat. Yes, hello Tux. And I will actually be online for all of this month. I got my internet paid. August is another thing. But I will be online for this month at least. I don't think that I'm going to have a phone for this month, but I will at least be able to keep this going. So, thumbs up on that one. Well, half a thumbs up. It's kind of good. Anyway, though, Trudeau came out and said that he admires the Chinese dictatorship. And he's been very... how do I want to phrase this? He's been following around China kind of like a little lost puppy while he's been in office. In addition to that, as I pointed out in previous streams, he has been working with the Chinese. He's been sending his military over to train with the Chinese. He's had Chinese working on Canadian soil. Not to mention that Canada still has a big problem with Chinese enclaves inside of Canada. He's been very deferential to them. He admires them a great deal. And I wonder, where does this lead? Okay? Now, I have already specified that I think that if China and the U.S. were to go to war, Canada's in a big problem. It's in a big pickle. Because China is going to ask Canada to side with them. In getting Canada to side with China, China would then be able to use Canada as a staging ground. And at that point, Canada's going to be faced on one side with an ally that Trudeau admires and has great leverage over them, and on the other side, the greatest superpower currently on the planet. That is a rock and a hard place that I would not want to be in. And I don't think that he's smart enough to pick the right side. So we'll have to see what happens then. But more importantly, what I think is happening here is when you look at his admiration for the Chinese dictatorship and you look at his treatment of, say, the trucker protests in February, was it February 22 or 21? Oh, I forget now. I think it was February 2021, where all the truckers came to Ottawa. What was his response to that? His response to the trucker protest was first to denounce them as being terrorists. He denounced the entire thing as domestic terrorism. He called them un-Canadian. He called them dangerous. He called them seditious. He called them basically every single bad name in the book to turn public attention against them. And he didn't need to try hard on that. Every single news outlet came out and also denounced the trucker protest. After that, he went through and he started shutting these people down. He went after their homes and their families. He went after their bank accounts. He went after their livelihoods. He said that every trucker in the protest would have their commercial licenses revoked. He would have the insurance on their trucks revoked, the registration on their trucks revoked. He would hurt them in every single way he could, short of putting them up against a wall. And eventually, it came to that. Because when everything else failed to work, he invoked the Emergency Powers Act and he sent in the police and the mounted police. It is mounted police, right? Mounties, mounted police. I have at least one Canadian in the chat. Please correct me on this one. But either way, he sent in both of them and he absolutely brutalized the protesters. What he did is he moved them in, he boxed everybody in for a mass arrest. That is, you establish several lines of police and you just march them forward, corralling people until you can pull them out, arrest them, and process them. He did that. There were only two other instances in history that I can think of that rivaled the brutality of this police action. One of them was the National Guard at Kent State. And if you don't know your U.S. history, the massacre at Kent State was a hippie protest at the Kent State University against the Vietnam War. And while I'm not going to go into the events here, it ended with the U.S. National Guard massacring the protest. The other one, of course, would be Tiananmen Square, where, as most people are even more aware, you had protesters against the Chinese Communist government at, I believe it was also a university? I think it was the Tiananmen University. But they were protesting in Tiananmen Square, and the Chinese military came in, ordered them to disperse or be arrested, and then they massacred the protesters in Tiananmen Square. This was Trudeau's Tiananmen Square. No one died this time, but you're never going to convince me that it wasn't for lack of trying. So what have we seen so far? We have seen that Justin Trudeau admires the Chinese dictatorship. We have seen that he has no problem using their tactics against his own citizens. And we see that he, or at least the people under him, which, by the way, if your the people under you are doing something, you, as the ultimate authority, have the power to stop it. The buck literally, well, in this case, I guess the loony stops with him. But he didn't. Why? Because we can at least take his absence of action as either ignorance and negligence of his duties or as a tacit agreement of what is being done. And I do think it is at least a tacit, if not a full agreement of what is being done. Because we've already seen his admiration of what China does, and we already have Bill C-11, which says that you must promote Canadian content to Canadian people. We already have Bill C-18, which says that you need to start paying Canadian institutions if you want to have access to what we're doing. And many of those platforms have now cut them off, which means that now all Canadian news is basically trapped inside of Canada. So we have all Canadian content in there, all Canadian news in there. Where does this go in the future? Here. Many people that are on the internet are familiar with at least the term, if not the actual thing itself. But this is, of course, the Great Firewall of China. And I'm not going to read the entire thing because it is long. I mean, I've seen longer things, but still. The Great Firewall is a combination of legislative actions and technologies enforced by the People's Republic of China to regulate the internet domestically. Its role in internet censorship in China is to block access to selected foreign websites and to slow down cross-border internet traffic. The Great Firewall operates by checking transmission control protocol, in other words, the TCP packets for keywords or sensitive words. If the keywords or sensitive words appear in the packets, access will simply be closed. If one link is closed, more links from the same machine will be blocked by the Great Firewall. The effect includes limiting access to foreign information sources, blocking foreign internet tools such as Google Search, Facebook, Twitter, Wikipedia, and others, mobile apps, and requiring foreign companies to adapt to domestic regulations. If we just take this last sentence on its own, limiting access to foreign information sources, that is Bill C-11. Blocking foreign internet tools, that is Bill C-18. It may not have been them who did the blocking, but the end result is that it got blocked. Now they could undo their bill. They could take that off the table and just say, you know what? No harm, no foul. Can we just go back to the way things were? They could do that, but they're not doing that. The end result of this is going to be that Canada is going to end up with the Great Firewall of Canada. And I think that Trudeau is going to be happy about that, because after all, that is just one more reason that Canada and China get to look like, mirror images. He wants to turn Canada into the next China. And by the way, just as a point of interest, one of the first things that President Xi did is appointed himself president for life. Now, whether that actually works or not, I don't know. Technically speaking, he is appointed by the Chinese, what's it called? They have like a congressional kind of system where you have people who represent all the different, I think it's precincts, districts, I forget what it is, all the different states inside of China, and they get to appoint the great leader. He basically appointed himself forever, so long as this current group is in power, and I do believe that the next transition of that group is in 2027, so we'll see what happens there. But if they do nothing, he's going to stay in power forever until he dies. I would not put it past Trudeau to also institute the same thing. He's already in a position where Labour in Canada has a nigh unbreakable grasp on power. Which means that as long as Labour holds power, and they do hold the majority of power in Canada, he can technically reign so long as his people keep him there. Now, the way Canadian politics works is the leading party gets to appoint their group. But they've appointed Trudeau at least twice that I can remember. Maybe more, I'm not sure. There's no reason why they could not continue to keep him there in the future. He could literally be Prime Minister for life. And if he manages to control the entire media and the flow of information inside of Canada, he could do that and nobody would ever have to know the difference. And on the subject of censorship, not only are we talking about, promoting Canadian content to Canadian people or limiting what other people can do across the border, but Canada also engages in literal censorship. There are things on the internet in Canada that simply cannot be searched for. If you search for things that are vaccine related, it will be hidden. Things that are COVID related will be hidden because you're only allowed to see, hear, read whatever the Canadian media wants you to see. This is not new. This has been in place for years now. But this is one further step on the way to making this a reality. So we got that covered. So we can go ahead and mark that as done. The next thing that I want to do may be a somewhat shorter one, but I want to move down to Britain's cancel culture because, well, Britain has been really big into the whole cancel culture thing for a long time, same as the US, same as Canada, but it's been taking a stark uptick over there. Now, I only really know about this because I follow the Lotus Eaters. I don't follow a whole lot of British politics, but I do follow them since I've been following Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, since he was a guy in a bedroom way back when. He's come very far. Very proud of him. He's very proud of himself, too. So that's all good. But what's been happening in Britain is that they've been adopting a lot of the same tactics that we've been seeing over here in the US and in Canada. Specifically, I have talked about cancel culture in the past. I've talked about it a couple of times. And what I've tried to express to people, what I've tried to make it clear is what cancel culture is. Because people have a hard time defining what cancel culture is. You ask 3 different people what cancel culture is, you'll get 3 different definitions. Some say that it's, it's justice for what people have done. Some people say that it's actually injustice done to people because, they just have to be socially unacceptable. Sometimes they say it's, justice for things that your ancestors have done. Either way, the end result of cancel culture is always the same. Because the idea of cancel culture is this. We all have a life, and we all have certain things in common, okay? Every single one of us lives somewhere, okay? Whether you live in a house, or an apartment, or a room, or a tent, or anywhere, you live somewhere. You have to exist somewhere, okay? Whether you're in a city, or a suburb, or the country, or the middle of the woods, you have to exist somewhere. You cannot just will yourself to be ethereal and intangible and just say, I'm now occupying a higher dimension. No, we all exist here and we all have to exist somewhere. We all need water. Let's go back to our rule of 3s, because I've said it before and I will repeat this until all of you can recite it in your sleep. The rule of 3s. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. I will repeat it again and again until you all remember it, because it is important. We all need shelter. We all need water. We all need food. And the idea of cancel culture is to take these things away from you to force you into compliance. And there are many ways to do this, as I have discussed before, but cancel culture is like the way to do it. Because what does cancel culture do? Cancel culture will say you did something problematic. You said a bad word. You had a bad take on something. Okay? You said something that somebody was offended by. Or you didn't fly the right flag. Or you posted the wrong sign. And now that you have done a bad, what we're going to do is we're going to punish you. We're not going to punish you directly. We're going to go after your home. Okay? We're going to protest your home. We're going to keep you up at all hours of the night. We'll block your driveway with people so that you can't get out in the morning or you can't come home at night. We'll make your home as unpleasant to live in as we can. We'll call your school or we'll call your job. And we'll tell them exactly what you did. And then we'll tell your job, we'll threaten your job, that if the job does not get rid of you, or if the school does not get rid of you, then they will go to the media and they will tell everybody in the world that your job or your school is complicit in having a bad person there. The end result of this, of course, is that, let's say you're a student on campus, maybe you get removed from the dorm, maybe you get expelled. Or if you have a job, maybe you lose your job. And of course, all of this is to simply make it so you can't live where you live. You can't pay for things like water or food. So you will have no shelter, no water, no food. And if they could take away your air somehow, they would too. The idea being that these are the things that you need for survival, and now you can no longer survive. So this is cancel culture at its crux. And we've been seeing it across the US and much of the West. Mostly in the US, mostly in Canada, but it's been spreading through Europe as well. And the Lotus Eaters did a recent video on it, and I wanted to talk about it. Because while they did a great job talking about the issue, I think they did a poor job discussing the implications of it. And they came so close. They came so very, very close. I was almost proud of them. But not quite. So these were a few of the stories that they covered, and I just clipped them and made a little collage out of them. I know, it's crap, but it gets the job done. So they were talking about how Nigel Farage, who is a political leader over there, I forget what party he's in, but he's literally the leader of the party. He is the equivalent of, say, Donald Trump and the Republicans, Joe Biden and the Democrats, I want to say like Marianne Williams and the Libertarians. I don't know. I don't remember. But either way, he's a political leader over there. And all of his bank accounts were closed. All of his various accounts have been closed. The same thing is true with TR. And I have to say TR because if I say the name, there is a very good or a very big risk that YouTube will take this stream down. So PayPal has shut down all of TR's services. He's not allowed to do that. And of course, he's already been banned from most banks, most other services. He had to go online because nobody else would give him an account. PayPal also did the same thing to the Free Speech Union. Because it says, let's see, they were a sinister form of cancel, or no, wait, that's the decision. I don't remember. Actually, PayPal might not have given a reason on this one, but I don't have the actual article. I just have the thumbnail here. The Yorkshire Society or Yorkshire Building Society closed a vicar's account after trans protest. And I didn't actually know what a vicar was until this. I'd heard the name a few times, but a vicar apparently is kind of like a priest, but higher, I think, like a super priest. Either way, man of the cloth. And so because he is obviously not just Christian, but like super Christian, he was protesting the trans movement during Pride Month. All of his stuff, gone. All of his accounts, gone. And this is from Konstantin Christian, basically the Trigonometry podcast, which I don't watch, but they're massive. I've heard of them. All of their accounts have been shut down as well. And if you notice, no explanation given. No explanation given. Down here, no explanation given. These two, of course, were given explanations, but those explanations were either just racism or hate. Now, I want to talk about this because I did hear the story from Lotus Eaters, and Tux says Lotus Eaters is great, though Sargon has moved very much to the right in recent time. Well, I mean, if Sargon has moved very much to the right, it's because of this. This is why. But I don't think that he was the one discussing. He might have been the one on the podcast, I don't remember. But either way, when they started off the segment, they started off saying, what can you do without a bank account? And they really discussed that for a minute. And they said, if you don't have a bank account, how far can you go? Like, on a daily basis, can you go get fuel without a bank account? Well, you have your credit card or your bank card, and that's usually what you would pay for at the pump. You could, maybe, depending on where you go, pay cash. But some places aren't taking cash. Could you go get your morning coffee? Almost all the coffee places around England have gone cashless, so you can't get your morning coffee. Could you go get breakfast? Maybe, because many of those places have gone cashless as well. So you go to work and you get paid. But how do you get paid? Most people have direct deposit. But if you don't have a bank account, how are they paying you? Can they pay you? Do they even have a method with which to pay you? So maybe you can get paid, maybe you can't. Maybe they pay you in cash. Okay, you go home. Once you get home, assuming you still have the gas to get home, then how do you pay your bills? Most people pay their bills online. Can you even pay your bills in cash? Most utilities will not take cash. Most of them, if you have to pay them in cash, you will have to either send in a check or a money order. Well, if you have to send them a check, you don't have a bank anymore. So you can't send them a check. How about a money order? Can you do that? Maybe. Do you know, and ask yourself this, if you had to get a money order today and you couldn't go to the bank, where would you go? Do you even know what you would do without a bank account? And they kept discussing this, said maybe you don't drive, maybe you take the bus. Can you get a bus ticket without a bank account, without having a card of some kind? How do you function in a society without a bank account? And they discussed this, and I'm like, oh, you're so close. You're so very close. They never quite got there because they continued just discussing this. They covered all the people that have been affected by this. But they never quite got to the why. They never quite got to the end goal that I just said. What is cancel culture? As I just stated, cancel culture is a way of removing people from society. So if I close this, there we go. So I can come back here. All right, so we'll green those real quick. The idea of cancel culture has become the weapon of mass destruction in the current culture war, because what we've found out is that not only can you go after a person this way, you can go after a whole bunch of people. When we talk about TR and all the people that followed him, he wasn't the only one that got blocked. It was anybody who followed him. Anybody who spoke on his behalf was also canceled. Anybody who did business with him was also canceled. Anybody who followed him online was also canceled. The same thing goes for Nigel Farage. He is the leader of his party, and he was canceled. However, he wasn't the only one. Other people in his party, and I think it's Labour, but I'm not positive on that one. I think it's Labour. Other people in his party have also had their accounts shut down. They've been denied services. They've had all these things. This is the weapon of choice to go after people, because if you can simply take away their resources, you take away their means to fight back. And that's why I want to get to this. See, once upon a time, before we had digital currencies and all these things, if you wanted to get rid of someone, if you did not want to compete with them anymore and you just wanted them gone, you only had a few options to yourself. Okay? First off, murder. You could go all Caesar on them. Stab them, shoot them, whatever it was. You kill the person, because if they're dead, then they can't oppose you. The same thing is also true if you just beat them stupid. If you got a posse of people together because, you didn't like somebody, and you beat just the ever-living stuffing out of them, then they might think twice. Let's say that you have a person who is running for a local office, okay? I'm not saying a congressperson or anything, because that would be a bit harder. But if you had somebody who is running for, say, mayor, and you're running for mayor, and you want to make sure that they get the idea that they need to drop out now, then maybe you get a posse of people together, and you beat them savagely. Maybe you put them in the hospital. Either way, you're going to get the idea across that if they continue this, you're going to beat them again, and next time they might not survive it. Alternately, maybe you don't go after them directly. Maybe you go after their family. Okay, maybe you assault their family. You beat up their wife, their husband, their kids. Maybe you don't go after their family at all. Maybe you just go after their home. Maybe you break into their home, trash the place, steal their stuff. Either way, though, however you do it, whether it's the murder, whether it's the assault, whether it's the theft, the entire idea here is to get them to either just drop out and stop doing whatever it is they're doing, or ideally for you, and again, this is where empathy and abstraction comes in, okay? I said we were going to need this. The idea is, from your perspective, to just make them go away. And if you are not a person of principle, if you are not a person of morals, and these things are okay for you, then why wouldn't you do these things? See, it's these principles and morals that we have that keep us from doing these things. As I said, the golden rule. Would you kill somebody to make sure that you won an election, or even just a contest of any kind? It doesn't even have to be an election. What if you're, say, a runner, okay? What if you're like a marathon runner or a sprinter or something? Would you kill somebody to make sure that they couldn't beat you? Most of us would think that's unthinkable, but maybe you would. Maybe these people would. The same thing goes with assault. The same thing with assault and theft. I have suddenly gone limp-wristed. Anyway, the same thing goes for assault, theft, all of this. The idea is to make them go away by any means necessary. No lines drawn. This is what cancel culture is. But it's different. You see, if you go through and murder somebody, you had to touch that person in some way. Even if it's a gun, okay? Which is like the most not touching you thing you can do. You still had to touch the gun. You had to point the gun. You had to pull the trigger on the gun. And you had to kill that person. Same thing is true with assault, whether it's with bare hands or whether it's with sticks, bats, crowbars, whatever. You had to do it. With theft, also similar. You had to break in. You had to take things. But cancel culture is different. Because cancel culture, you don't actually have to do anything to them. You just have to do it to the things around them. The idea that you don't actually go to them directly, you just get together in front of their house and have a protest. You're not doing anything to them. You're not touching them. You're not hurting them in any way. You're just making things unpleasant for them. And thus, it's up to them where they want to continue to stay here and endure this, which you can keep this up as long as you need to, or you can, or they can leave. That's it. They can either sit here and suffer, or they can leave. The same thing is also true if you go to their university, or you go to their job, or anything like that. You can go after their job and say, look, job, whatever it is, you can either get rid of this person or we're gonna punish you for it. Okay, this is literally the same as the scene from Full Metal Jacket. I have a dog barking. Hold on a second. Just hold that thought real briefly. Sorry about this. Out of breath, out of breath, out of breath. Okay. As I said, I knew that I would have a delivery between, or in the middle of the stream. It's okay, though. 2 flights of stairs. So out of shape. Anyway. As I was saying, the great game of I'm not touching you. You go to somebody's job and you tell them that if you don't do this, we're going to punish you for it. It's basically this scene out of Full Metal Jacket when the drill instructor says that no longer will he punish Private Pyle. Instead, he will punish everybody else until they deal with Private Pyle. So you go to the job and tell them that they have to deal with this instead. Suddenly their hands are clean. They didn't have to do anything to you. No, it's the job that did it. And of course, the job is going to say, look, we don't know what's going on, but we can't handle what's going to happen to us, and so This is the way things are. So now you have protesters outside of your house. You can't sleep at night. Maybe you can't even get into or out of your driveway. Maybe your neighbors are getting mad at you because they don't like the noise either. And so your neighbors are looking at you and saying, it's your fault, either fix what you did or get the hell out of here. And so now you're sitting in your house, miserable. The people in the street hate you. Your neighbors hate you. You have no money left. Maybe your utilities got cut off. Maybe you're not making rent. Maybe you have no food left. So you are going to be, or you already are, out of shelter. You don't have any more water. You don't have any more food. What are you supposed to do now? Your options are threefold. Number one, you can kneel before the mob and beg for forgiveness, which maybe you will get, maybe you will not. You could just sit there and maybe they'll give up eventually, but more than likely you'll sit there until you're dead. After all, they've got homes to go to. They can go get food whenever they want. They're not the ones that had their income taken away. They can wait you out forever. You will not survive, or you can flee. Technically speaking, I suppose there is a fourth option, because flight goes hand in hand with fight. You could try to go down fighting. You're probably going to be outnumbered. And on top of that, if you fight back, if you are starving and cold, thirsty, sleep deprived, all of this thing because of what they're doing, if you fight back, because they haven't touched you, you are the aggressor. So it's either beg for forgiveness, which you may or may not get, suffer until you die, fight back and go to prison, or flee. Those are your options. Because this is the current way we are handling things. And this is not a legal system, okay? There's nothing legal about this. And in fact, it may be outright illegal. Because this may fall under the grounds of sustained and persistent harassment. I would argue that it is. It's very much sustained and persistent harassment. But if nobody does anything about it, well, I've covered law on this channel before. Laws only exist on paper. The actual laws are that which a community will enforce. Anything else literally doesn't matter. And so this is what they are trying to do to all of these prominent people in the US, Canada, and as we're seeing in a growing rate in Britain. And they're doing so by going after all of these people's bank accounts, because this is the idea. They don't care what their arguments are when it comes to British or English politics. The idea is simply this. It's not enough to be able to beat you in Parliament. They want to remove the people from Parliament. Labour or the Tories or whatever may have so many seats in Parliament. But what does it matter if all of those seats are empty? And this is the new way that we are going about the culture war. It doesn't matter how many seats you have in the US House of Representatives if those seats are empty. It doesn't matter how many seats you have in the Senate. Well, actually, you only have 2 seats in the Senate. But it doesn't matter how many are there if the seats are empty. Just get rid of the people. And everything else will follow. But again, murder, illegal. Assault, illegal. Theft, illegal. You do those, and you're the one going to jail. However, this is the political version of Two kids sitting in the back seat of the car on a road trip going, "I'm not touching you," while holding or moving their hands all over and around their sibling, but not actually touching them. They're not touching them. But that doesn't mean they're not doing anything, and doesn't mean there's not a point. Because just like the point in the "I'm not touching you" game in the backseat of the car is to get a reaction, the point of cancel culture, and the point of the culture war in general, is to get rid of the entire other culture. I mean, it's called cancel culture, I think, for two reasons. Number one, it is a culture of canceling people. But number two, it is trying to get rid of that entire culture. They don't want coexistence with people. They don't want compromise. They want nothing of it. They want one thing. And when I say they, I mean the general left in Western democracies, in Western civilization. Across all the countries, the general left. Whether it's the left in Britain and the UK, the left in Canada, the left in the US, the left in Germany, the left in France, the left in Spain, the general left. They want absolute, unadulterated, unmitigated power. And they do not want to share, compromise, or be threatened by anyone else. And this is how they're going to do it. And this will not stop until we finally agree that cancel culture is absolutely as horrendous and punishable as the rest of those. This idea that you can form a mob around somebody's house should be responded to the same way an assault would. That is to say, you round them up and you arrest them all for harassing somebody in their own home. But as we have seen, the people who want to do this have gotten themselves very, very much dug in to the political system, to the point where before Roe v. Wade was overturned in the US and abortion was sent back down to the states as a state right instead of a federal right, there were protests around Supreme Court justices' homes. This is expressly illegal under federal law. You are not allowed to protest outside of a judge's house, nor are you allowed to protest outside of a juror's house. Because to protest outside of one or both of them is to put undue influence on what is supposed to be a neutral proceeding. However, it was done. And we saw it done to a judge, a Supreme Court justice after Roe v. Wade. We also saw it done during the George Floyd trials of Derek Chauvin, where people had protested outside of the homes of jurors, one of them even going so far as to leave a severed pig head at one of the jurors' homes. Now, did they do anything to the jurors? No, they did not. The jurors were not harmed in any way. Were they influenced? Were they affected by it? Yes. Yes, they were. Because there is nobody who is going to walk out into their front doorstep and see a severed pig's head there and not be influenced in some way. However, it was never punished. And if it was never punished, then it must not be illegal. So before I move on to the next subject, because I am coming up on the half hour here, Tux says, "You're evil if you defend your property. You should just let your property be destroyed and accept being silenced and rendered destitute. Note, the same nicety will not be given to you." Yeah, that's true. Anything that you do is going to be branded as evil, wrong, and illegal. Because we're not dealing with an objective legal system here. We're not dealing with an objective moral system here. We're dealing with a subjective one, which again goes back to this idea of empathy and abstraction. because it is entirely subjective. The only way that you will ever truly be able to understand it is to put yourself in those people and say, if these were the things that I believed in, and these were the actions that I'm taking, how would I feel about this? And what would my next moves be? Again, when it comes to doing things like playing chess, this is one of the reasons why you want to use things like abstraction in chess. You know what your move is going to be, but what would be the response to your move? What would you, if you were your opponent, do to you moving your piece? The same thing is true here. You know what you would do, but what would one of these leftists do if you were to do it? And they are surprisingly, shockingly predictable. You don't have to agree with what they're doing, you just have to be able to understand them. Okay, also I can make this one green too, just because it's bothering me now that I noticed it. Alright, so what do we want to do next? Do we want to topic Ben & Jerry's or the U.S. Constitution? I'm going to grab a drink real quick. I'll leave it to you. Which do you want to hear first? It's actually going really well. It's amazing how well this works when you actually prepare for it. Is this what normal people do? Do they actually prepare for things? I thought they all just got good enough at this and they just did it off the cuff. Huh. Okay. There we go. It's also getting very hot in here. Let's see. I mean, I guess we could do the U.S. Constitution first. I have to wait a minute for the chat to actually catch up, though. JP says Ben & Jerry's. Okay, I'm actually good with that one. That means the stream is caught up far enough for the chat to see it. Okay, we can do Ben & Jerry's then. Alright, so what do I have for this one? So, this just recently, primarily on July 4th, Independence Day in the US, but probably also on July 1st in Canada. I don't know, I didn't actually see the dates on these things, but Ben & Jerry's has gotten themselves into hot water. They've gotten themselves into hot water in both Canada and the US because they put out 2 Twitter posts. Now, I was actually unaware of the Canadian one until somebody sent it to me. But in both Canada and in the US, they have started what they're calling the hashtag landback, which is, they say, and this is identical in both nations, that both Canada and the United States are built upon stolen land. And as we come up here on almost, 250 years in the US and I don't know how long in Canada, it is time for us to give it back. Now, of course, this went over like a lead balloon because people saw that and said, wait. You're telling us that we need to just give back the entire country to the people who lived here before? Yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We really don't care what the reasons are for it. So, last I heard, they had lost something like $3 billion in the valuation of their company, and their stock price is still dropping. But I want to talk about it because many people are having a knee-jerk reaction to their post, and unfortunately, knee-jerk reactions are all we get these days because most people have not been taught to think about things before they speak about them. But hey, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help you to think about things. Like, I want to be all the things that you weren't taught in school. I want to be the critical thinking you weren't taught in school. Okay? That's what I'm here for. If I can help you to think about other things, great. Like, this discussion should not end here. I want you to go out and look at other things and then start questioning them. That's my goal. This is a vessel to get you from point A to point B. And point B is when you go out and do it yourself. So, anyway, I looked up an article, and I don't think I have the article pulled up here, but there was a quote by somebody at Ben & Jerry's where they literally said, and I'm gonna color this one in. They said the entire purpose of the land back hashtag was, and this isn't a direct quote, but close enough, it's paraphrased, give back land and resources to the indigenous people for them to care for, control, and for their protection, presumably from people like us, who do nothing but rape and despoil the land. And so that's the entire crux of their entire thing. They want us to start just ceding the land back to the indigenous people. Now, on paper, this, such as many other activist platforms like it, we've heard it before. There's many other activist platforms like this. This is nothing new, and it's not even new for the indigenous people, whether it's the First Nation. It is First Nation people, I believe, in Canada. I think it is. First Nation people in Canada or the Native Americans in the U.S. They have been promoting this stuff for a long time. They've had people promoting it for them. It's nothing new. We've been here before. We've done this before. It's never gone anywhere before. It's not going to go anywhere. And why is it not going to go anywhere? Well, because not too long ago, I already talked about this. I did an entire 2.5, 3-hour lecture, I forget what it was, on the idea of reparations, retribution, restitution, reparations, and revenge. Because I was talking about the reparations bill that was in Canada, which looks like it's going to go through, which is going to leave a whole lot of people disappointed, but that's a tangent. But I talked about that one, and I wanted to discuss the differences between all of these things. Because I covered the idea of retribution as a practical and a legal question. I covered restitution as a legal and practical, retribution and restitution as legal frameworks. I also covered the idea of reparations, and I covered the concept of revenge, because neither of those have a legal backing to them. They do have a pragmatic one, just not a very good one. And not to go through the entire discussion again, but to make it very simple. When it comes to restitution, retribution first. Retribution is very simple. We say that you have done a bad thing and you need to be punished for it. And what that punishment is should be proportional to the crime and damage done. Whether that is community service to repay the damage done to a community, whether it is a fine to make repair and restitution for damages done, whether that is jail time, prison time, whatever it happens to be, the idea is you are going to be punished. Okay? And this is for you. This is your punishment for what you did. Restitution, on the other hand, is make whole. Meaning that if somebody has been damaged in some way, we try to make them whole again. If their car has been totaled, you owe them the value of a new car. If their home has been damaged, you owe them the repairs on their home to make it as it was before. And even if it's not tangible, if you have injured a person and they're going to be suffering for the rest of their life, we try to assign a value to that as best we can to make them whole for the rest of their lives. Sometimes this comes in the form of a payment that you must make to a person for the rest of their lives. as long as it's not too egregious and it falls within the Constitution, we can do these things. However, reparations and revenge. The idea of reparations is things that are owed for past damages. So not current damages necessarily done to you, but damages that you have suffered because of past actions done. In this instance, we're basically talking about things that exceed the statute of limitations. Okay? And not just exceed the statute of limitations by a year or 10 years, but we're talking about lifetimes ago. We're talking about statute of limitations that goes back to your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation. This is what we mean when we're talking about reparations. We're talking about not just the sum total of damages suffered by them, but also the knock-on effects of that. That's why we talk about people who have been generationally disenfranchised by past policies. When it comes to the black community in the US and Canada, we're talking about slavery and how, you had white people who had generational wealth handed down to them, whereas black people started with nothing or less than nothing, and so now, several generations on, they are still lagging behind. And there is an argument about how much that is actually true that is not I'm not going to get into that here. But that is the argument given, and thus reparations are needed to make them whole again, based on past things. And then, of course, there is the idea of revenge, where revenge may be based upon something that was done recently or may be done previously. But revenge does not have any it doesn't have any goal to make you whole or fix a problem. Revenge is all about self-satisfaction. And so reparations is never satisfied because reparations is incalculable. How do you calculate the damages done based on what happened to people 150, 200 years ago, your great ancestors? And how do you calculate the damages done to them and how that affects you today? It's incalculable. There is no metric you could use to that. And as it is incalculable, it can never be satisfied. The same thing is true with revenge. Revenge can also never really be satisfied. Not because there's no metric to use, but because revenge doesn't care about a metric. Revenge only cares about satisfaction that will never actually come. And I don't say this because I'm trying to pretend that I am some kind of moral savant. I say this based on previous testimony given by people who have gone out and gotten revenge for things. We all love the story of a person getting revenge for something. After all, most people have seen at least one of the John Wick movies. The John Wick movies are literally about a man who gets revenge, and we cheer for that man every day. And at the end of the day, he is, well, at the end of the first movie, he was actually kind of satisfied. Kinda. But the longer it goes, the less you get satisfaction from any of the revenge, and suddenly it just becomes more of how many people can Keanu Reeves kill? Because revenge is just never satisfied. The same thing is true in real life. Talk to people who have actually gone out and gotten revenge for something. Especially go talk to people who are in prison for it. And they will all tell you the same thing. Was it worth it? No. It wasn't. They did it. They thought it would feel good. Maybe it did feel good in the moment, but was it worth it? Did it satisfy them? No, it never does. So revenge is never satisfied. Unfortunately, however, these two things are what we're talking about here, because when we talk about giving land back to people, specifically the First Nations people and the Native Americans in the US. We're talking about events that were done hundreds of years ago. Now, I don't want to get into the ethics of it, but I will say this. When they talk about the things that were done to the Native Americans, and they talk about the horrors of that time, I actually do not disagree. Now, I have a much, much different opinion on where things are today compared to what happened back then. But one thing that I will agree with is that the things that were done to the First Nations people and the things that were done to the Native Americans were horrific. By any standard today, the things that were done back then are literal crimes against humanity, and some of the things that were done would have been illegal under the Geneva Convention. Specifically, when we look at things like the smallpox blankets, okay? We agreed that after World War I, the usage of chemical weapons and biological weapons were something that had the potential to destroy entire swaths of land and population uncontrolled, and that these things could and should never be used again. But when we talk about what was done to the Native Americans in the US, the delivery of blankets infected by smallpox, an act of charity that was sabotaged to be a mass slaughter. And not just a mass slaughter, but a mass slaughter in the slowest and most painful way possible. Yeah. We did bad things. And do we owe them for that? Maybe we do. The problem with that is, how do you even begin to calculate it? There are also such things as the Trail of Tears. And that was a forced march that killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Native Americans. That was also horrible. And again, we should make things better. But how? And it's the fact that these would fall into the category of reparations because they are immeasurable that brings us to where we are right now. We did horrendous things to the Native Americans, and at least in Canada and the US, when we finally recognized that we had been genuinely cruel and awful to them, we did do our best to make it better. There was no way that we could undo what we did. There's nothing we could do. Because even if we were to let them slaughter an equal number of Americans or Canadians, does that actually make us equal? Would they no longer feel the same way afterwards? The answer to that, of course, is no. As it turns out, an eye for an eye does not actually equal justice. And so what have we ended up with? Well, we have ended up with these native tribes, the First Nation people in Canada and the native tribes in America, who have been kind of locked in their well, they're not locked in their reservations. We have given them reserved land. And they have these reservations that are absolutely theirs. Okay, we have given them vast swaths of land and said, we did wrong. You did have a claim here, and so we will give you this land. It is sovereign territory. You still operate under the Constitution, which means you still have all the rights and protections therein. However, any further laws are yours. Federal law does not apply to sovereign territory, which means that they can have weed and any other drugs that they want, which is a topic we are going to get to. You will not be subject to federal registration protocols. You're not subject to federal citizenship. This is your own sovereign territory. You are your own nation inside the U.S. We gave them this as our best way to make amends and say, we're sorry for what we did. You have the right to exist. Continue to exist. We're sorry. But was that good enough? And Tuck says, I would respond to that saying that we didn't have germ theory back then, but even if you went by what we did know, they knew enough. Yes, they did. Plus, there's at least some people that wrote that they intentionally gave items they knew were diseased. No, not some people. Pretty much all of them knew. Because, of course, you didn't want your own people to be infected by this. They intentionally infected blankets with smallpox and gave it to them. Everybody involved knew full well what they were doing and what the result was going to be. Even if they didn't fully understand the vector how, they understood enough that somebody sick had this thing is sick too. If we give it to somebody else, they will become sick. We knew. So anyway, we have had these native tribes on reserved land. It's their land, but these people have been on this land, and they have a chip on their shoulder. Now, whether that chip on their shoulder is deserved or not, I'm not going to get into. Quite frankly, I tend to agree with them. I say that you have a grudge. You're kind of welcome to have that grudge. Your people were abused, and nobody can take that away from you. I mean, this is true. This is also the same thing that I look at when I look at the black culture in the US, because much of the hatred in the black culture stems from not just slavery, but after slavery, after blacks were officially freed, they were basically cast out with nothing, and they said, figure it out. They were also not treated as equal people. They were treated as second-class citizens for decades. I mean, from, I think the Civil War was the 1860s. They didn't actually get equal rights until the 1960s. So we're talking almost about a century worth of second-class citizenship. And when it came to the actual activism and the protest to get equal rights, they were brutalized. I mean, all of this is true. And a lot of people still carry a lot of hatred from that today. And not only do they carry that hatred, they pass that hatred on. They pass it on to their children. They pass it on to their nieces and nephews, to their grandchildren. They want to make sure that it is never forgotten what was done to them, and they want to stay angry at it. They want to stay enraged at it, which is similar to something that we see in the Native Americans today, because they have not lost that either. Ever since we stopped and we gave them their reservations, they have done nothing but seethe in almost 200 years of hatred towards an entire race of people. I want to attribute this to like the Nazis and the Jews, because this would be like if the Jews spent 200 years being angry at the Germans for what the Nazis did. And what would they be capable of after 200 years of generational hatred towards an entire nation of people? And there are some people who are actually like that. Not very many, but there are some that are like that. We haven't had 200 years of hatred against the Germans yet, but I mean, I guess we can revisit this in 2140 and see where things are then. Regardless, though, the Native Americans and the First Nations people have had roughly 200 years to just sit and seethe and hate people. And they have done a great job of that, because they haven't been shy about it either. Whenever it comes to the topic of land or rights or things like that, they come through and they describe white devils and every single bad thing that was done to them in the past. And they want to hold current people responsible for that. They want reparations. More importantly, they want revenge. And now we have Ben and Jerry's who are saying that we should actually give the reparations. Well, I want to entertain that argument for a minute, because, and I wonder if I can find it real quick. I should have had this one pulled up beforehand, but I didn't think that I would need it, so let's see if I can pull this one up real quick. Let's see. Ben and Jerry's. Okay, now can I find the article that I had yesterday? Probably not. I don't see it. All right, one more try. One more search, and then I'm just going to ignore it and move on. Because it should be somewhere up here. Not there. Not there. Was it this one? No, not that one. Ah, here it is. I found it. All right. So this is from Newsweek, and I don't know how I couldn't find Newsweek, but here we go. I found Newsweek. So, Indigenous chief wants to take back Ben & Jerry's headquarters built on stolen land, okay? Which, you know, is kind of fair because, like I said, when they first announced this, it went over like a lead balloon, and a lot of people said, yeah, Ben & Jerry's wants to give land back, why don't you start with yours? But more importantly, if I come down... Oh, wait, was this not it? Was this the wrong article? Maybe it wasn't. Oh, this might not have been it, actually. Oh, no, here it is. Okay, never mind, I got it. From the CBC. See, I'm giving them their, I'm giving them their nickel for looking at their ads and such. So this was the Canadian tweet. See, oh, Canada, our home on stolen land. Of course, they're all happy about this, but more importantly, I want to get down here to this woman. Because she is a lawyer, member of the Eel River... Or no, wait. No, yeah, it is. That is her. So, Paul Mitter said to her, land back means giving land and resources back to the Indigenous people for their control, care, and protection. Very importantly here, I want to point out, quote, it doesn't mean all Canadians are kicked out of their homes and have to go back to their countries of their family's origin, said Paul Mitter. And I want to talk about this. Now, as I pointed out before, when it comes to reparations and revenge, that the idea is these things don't have an upper limit. You cannot measure reparations. Similarly, you cannot measure revenge. Ergo, when it comes to instituting policies, these are policies that will not have measures and they will not have endpoints. And I have to kind of finish this up quickly because I'm coming up on my half-hour mark. But what they say now is it does not mean that Canadians are going to be kicked out of their homes or have to go back to their countries of origin. Okay. And I fully believe her when she says this. However, she does not speak for all of them. And when we look at what's going to happen, the first thing that we may see happen is, why don't we grant her exactly what she is what they're proposing, okay? We cede control of land back to Indigenous peoples. Okay? That means that municipality governments, that city governments, maybe even state or provincial governments cede control of territory to the First Nations people. What then? Well, that means that they get to write their own laws. They get to collect their own taxes, gather their own resources, so and so, and that these things are no longer under the purview of the federal government, whether that government be Canadian or American. Again, I want to keep in mind, and this is where I want to go ahead and apply empathy and abstraction. I want you to put yourself in the position of one of those people who has that big chip on their shoulder and says, my family was brutalized by your people 200 years ago. And now, I have complete, unmitigated control over you now. Many people would probably not jump on that opportunity to do something. But how many of them would? See, we all look at politics and we look at politicians and we say, we don't want to have bad people in politics. Okay, we all agree that having the wrong people in politics is usually a recipe for disaster. When you talk about ceding a government to a group like the First Nations people or the Native Americans and just saying, we are now putting an entire population under your control, and they are under your laws, your jurisdictions, you have to manage them. What do you think that some of these people are going to want to do? You know, it's actually kind of funny. When feminists talk about men, and they talk about how dangerous men are, one of the arguments that they love to use is the poison skittle. Okay? Maybe only 1 out of 10 men are bad. Maybe only 1 out of 100 men are bad. But what if I gave you a bowl with 100 Skittles? Okay? All of them are regular Skittles except for one. One of them which has been laced with deadly poison. Would you take a Skittle out of that bowl? Would you take 2? How much of a risk would you give that bowl of Skittles before you would just say, you know what? I don't think I want any because it's too dangerous. That's the same thing that feminists say about men. Maybe only 1 in 10 men, maybe only 1 in 100 men are dangerous. But do you want to get involved with any of them if it could cost you your life? Now, it generally seems to be a nonsensical argument, and I would tend to disagree with it. However, if that's the argument they want to use, why can't we use the same thing here? I mean, if we're going to use a bad argument in one place, then I guess it's on the table then, isn't it? Would we want to put an entire population of Americans under the control of the First Nations people, knowing full well that some of these people probably have a deep desire to brutalize Americans in the same way that Americans brutalized their ancestors? Generally speaking, probably a bad idea. But this is not really the subject that I wanted to get into, because I don't think it's 1 in 100. I think there is a bigger problem at hand here. And I want to show that here. Wait, did I just close? No, I didn't. Okay, we're good. So this is a story out of the Atlantic, and this comes from a long, long time ago. This is from 2013. But believe me, there are a lot more articles on this than before. And that is that Indian reservations for a long time have had big problems. On reservation land, there have been drug problems forever. Alcoholism problems forever. And reservations are one of the highest crime rate areas in both the US and Canada. The reason, of course, being that on this land, they're not generally interested in policing their own actions. Now, there's several reasons for this. Some of them are actually kind of understandable. The idea being that they don't want to police their own people because, in general, they have better opinions of their people, and they have higher expectations for their people, and they don't want to hurt what could otherwise be good people. After all, if you're going to lock somebody away in jail or in prison, then you've locked away any potential within them. And when you already have a small population of people to begin with, the loss of any potential in one person is kind of devastating. Unfortunately, however, this also has a knock-on effect where if you also don't curb the behavior, then it continues. And so we have a problem on reservations where you have rampant crime in these places. I don't want to talk about the crime problem there. That could be a subject for an entire lecture on its own. But what I do want to talk about is if you give people back these massive swaths of land and now say that you're responsible for policing and managing all of this land and the people therein, if they can't manage the reservation as it is, it's not going to get better once they have a larger area to do it in. You have people who are willingly overlooking crime. Tribal justice systems willingly overlook the crime of tribal citizens. So if you were to suddenly add great swaths of land back into this, you're not going to fix that problem. And instead, you're only going to be subjecting a larger number of people to suffer in the same way. Or worse. And unfortunately, this is one of those effects that people like Ben and Jerry's have not thought through. Reparations or giving the land back is not going to fix the problems of the First Nations or Native people that they have now. While you can make all the arguments that maybe they are deserving of more, it's not going to fix their problems now. And I don't have it pulled up because I only heard about this case this morning. But there was a case of, I think it was the state of Nevada versus the Navajo state, where it's either on Nevada or Arizona. Either way, they're fighting over water. Because whether it's Nevada or Arizona, both of the states don't have water. You're living in the middle of a desert. But they both need water. And so the Navajo were actually suing the state of Nevada because they said that it was the state of Nevada's duty to make sure that the Navajo people had water access. That is to say that they had wells, and they had pumps, and they had reservoirs, and all of these things to make sure that their people had water. The Supreme Court actually ruled against them, saying that the Navajo reservation is sovereign territory. It is outside completely the jurisdiction of both the federal and the state government. And so if the Navajo people need water, then they need to find the water on their own land, or they need to make a deal with the state through commerce, which is completely unregulated by the federal government because it's inside the state of Nevada or Arizona. I forget, but I think it was Arizona actually. But they need to work that out between the two of them. But the state of Arizona is not responsible for providing them with water. So what is going to happen then if Ben and Jerry's was to get their wish and suddenly the entire state of Arizona was given to the Navajo people? Is that going to solve their problem? It's not. I mean, it may help them in the short term because they would be able to go to wherever there was already water stored and take the water. But it doesn't solve the long-term problem of how they get water. This is a knock-on effect. This is a long-term problem that no one has thought through. And it's going to come if they actually did it, which this is not going to go through. But even if they were to pull this off, the short-term damages of it would far exceed the long-term end result, which I have to assert would probably also be bad. This was, at its core, short-sighted, naive, ignorant, and just not helpful to anyone. Alright, so I kind of ran over on that topic, but we covered everything I wanted to. There is one more topic left. We're just going to green these out, and then we'll move on to the last one after I get a drink. Also, I see Fubar's in the chat. I really hope that that name is not prophetical. Says, hi, oh dear, seems like topics that are going to get people banned. Probably me. Or canceled. I suppose that I can look forward now to having cancel culture show up outside my door, protesting me for being anti-Native American or anti-First Nation. Because, yeah, here I am. I'm the racist. Tell me, I'm so racist. Where's everybody from in my chat? I think that I have at least one Canadian in there. I think I have at least one South African in there. Where's everybody else from? Fubar also says, every one of these I've tuned into has been well thought out and presented. I can think of a few communities I could point your way if you'd like some more exposure. You're free to share this out with anyone you think will listen to it. Quite frankly, you can share it anywhere. Except maybe not send it to the FBI. I'm on enough watch lists as it is. I don't need to be on any more of them, so don't share any with the FBI. Unless you are the FBI. Oh, you're from England? No, you're not the FBI. No, that would make you MI6. Or is it MI5? I forget. Either way, the government's after me. JP says, I'm down the street in PGH. I don't know where PGH is, but if you're down the street from me, you want to get lunch? Because I'm hungry. Anyway, though, let's get on to our last topic, and that is the U.S. is currently in the process of dissolving the U.S. Constitution, and there is a lot to talk about here. But trust me, I'm not going to stay on any one topic for too long, mostly because if you follow the news at all, you've probably heard a lot of this already, and if you haven't heard a lot about these, you can go do some of your own research. I mean, I hate to say go do your own research because it's usually a cop-out, but I can't go through every single one of these could probably be its own lecture on its own. So I can't do that much. But anyway, we're going to cover this. So dissolving the U.S. Constitution. So there's a big case that came out this week. And that case was out of Missouri. Specifically, it was Missouri versus the Biden administration. I don't think that's the actual court case name, but that's what I found it under when I searched it. So again, this comes out of Missouri. And what this was is a lawyer took the federal government to court in Missouri over the FBI's influence and interference with big tech and social media platforms. Again, we're talking Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all of these social media platforms where the internet public square, where people get together and have conversations. So the FBI had been caught, and they were caught a long time ago, but it took a while for them to actually be revealed through evidence. but they were caught going to big tech platforms and telling them what they were allowed to publish and what they needed to censor. They were told what keywords to look for. They were told what people to get rid of. They were told what problematic networks were and how people associated with them would be at risk of giving what they called, quote-unquote, misinformation or, quote-unquote, disinformation. And they wanted to censor people. Now, that is a big problem in the US because we have what's called the Constitution. And most people have at least heard of the Constitution, even if they don't know it, because, I mean, the US is just... everybody in the world talks about the US, so... Anyway, US Constitution is several amendments that gives people, well, not... I almost screwed up there. I said it gives people the rights. No, it tells people what their rights are. It does not give rights, and I'm going to get into that shortly. But the First Amendment of the Constitution, because this is going to be a quick... this entire section here is going to be a quick rundown of the Bill of Rights. Amendment number 1 is the Freedom Amendment. Okay? And I say the Freedom Amendment because it has 5 different parts. Every U.S. citizen has, and even people who are here on U.S. visiting, are protected under this. The freedom of speech, religion, press, petition, and assembly. Okay? These are the 5 freedoms granted. And when I say granted, I don't mean that the government says that you are allowed to do these. What it specifically says is the government cannot stop you from doing these things. Now, these are very different things. There's a very strict distinction here that must be addressed. The government is not allowed to stop you from doing these things. They cannot tell you what you're allowed to say. They cannot tell you where you're allowed to gather. They cannot tell you what you're allowed to print or say. They cannot tell you what you're allowed to worship. They cannot do these things. Now, this is where the crux is, because if the FBI, which is a federal agency, it is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, if the FBI, and let's be honest, probably the rest of the alphabet soup, CIA, NSA, all of it, have been going to platforms and telling them what they cannot allow on their platform, that is a direct violation of the First Amendment. And a Missouri either Supreme or Superior Court, I forget exactly what it is, agreed. And they said, yes, by this argument, the FBI has engaged in egregious First Amendment violations. And as such, they, let's see, a court order blocking the Biden administration violating the First Amendment. So the court order, I don't know if it was a restraining order or an injunction or what it was, but either way, the court ordered that the FBI and, in fact, the government as a whole shall have no further contact with social media. That means that they can have a Facebook page, but they are not allowed to contact the Facebook corporation unless there has been a crime committed. Like if somebody found child pornography on Facebook, that can go to the FBI. That's a crime. But the FBI cannot go to Facebook and tell them what to do. For that matter, they can't even go to Facebook to tell them to turn over the child pornography unless they get a warrant. They are not allowed to tell Facebook to do anything because the government does not have that ability. The corporation, just as people, have rights. And the Biden administration and the government as a whole has been trampling all over those rights for a long time now. See, this is just the First Amendment of speech that got blocked. But we also have to remember that they were telling people they were not allowed to go to church during COVID, or synagogue. They didn't tell people they couldn't go to the mosque for some reason, but either way, they told people that they weren't allowed to go out and gather with people, which was a direct restriction of the right of assembly. They told people that they weren't even allowed to go online and file petitions against it. So the government has been for a long time now restricting basically every single aspect of the First Amendment. And now they're finally getting pushback. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important for a couple of reasons. The first reason, of course, is the fact that, it happened, okay? The fact that we're even here and we had to get a court to tell them you're not allowed to talk to social media is significant. But what's more important is the response to it. The response to it was for the government to come back and file not just an appeal, wanting them to revisit the case and potentially overturn the ruling, but also an injunction. If you're not familiar with what an injunction is, an injunction simply means to set aside the court's ruling until it can be re-administrated. Meaning that during the time where this is being re-administrated, the government should be free to tell social media what to do again. I got a few comments. Let's see. Oh, Fubar said no, people should do their own research. Okay, here's the thing about that. You're right, people should do their own research. But do your own research is also the go-to primarily for leftists when they don't want to tell you or explain to you their point of view and they just say, go do your own research. You're right, people should do their own research, but those words have a very, very bad connotation right now. Fubar also said, I'm not sure social media had any reason to comply under law. Requests were made and complied with. That is also true. As far as we know. Again, much of this is still coming out, and we're not sure what was threatened under the table. Because we are talking about groups like the FBI here who could say, we can't tell you to do this, but man, it would sure be a pity if you didn't do it. It's basically the Minecraft meme of nice house you have there. Be a shame if something were to happen to it. Tuck says, not true. BLM was allowed to protest fierily, but mostly peacefully. I think it's just fiery. Not sure if fierily is a word, but you know what? You trademark that. You trademark that, you put it on a shirt, you make 50 bucks. And Fubar says, disgusting that Warship was shut down here in the UK too. Oh yes, I'm well aware. I, of course, am American, and so my news is American-centric, but I followed it in Britain, and in Germany, and in France, and in Canada. Canada, I think, was worse than all of Europe. Canada did things that even the US was just like, whoa. But anyway, back on topic. So the government has, they have filed an injunction saying that we should be able to tell social media what to do. And at this point, it's not even really an argument anymore. They were told not to talk to social media, and they said we should be able to talk to social media. Well, now we're beyond the point where we can argue, well, were you doing it? And what were you doing? Now it's, why do you so badly want to be able to tell them what to do? Okay? The mask, it's off. And the government, especially, significantly, the Biden administration has been shown for the authoritarians they are. And we're just getting started. Because I have a whole list. Okay? I got a whole list here. And we're going to go through all of them because this is pretty much the entire Bill of Rights that they're violating. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm missing 2 of them, but it's okay. So, that's the First Amendment. And I need to open that back up again. Chrome. There we go. Next up. This is from CBS News. So after a Texas shooting back in 22, I forget which one forget which one it is because there were so very many of them. I wonder if this was the Uvalde shooting. It might have been. Actually, I could probably just look at the, this. Let's see. President addressing the shooting. Formal remarks. Second times happened. Day forward. I'm not seeing it. It doesn't really matter, though. I mean, I hate to say that. It sounds callous, but it doesn't really matter. The point is this. Biden says that the Second Amendment is not absolute. Now, that's actually kind of ironic, given the Second Amendment says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The wording there is pretty obvious. However, we've been ignoring that for a very long time already, and we now only finally seem to be going back to it. However, the Biden administration has said the Second Amendment is not absolute. Now, this is only one article that I picked up because the assault on the Second Amendment has been so broad, so varied, and so persistent that I could not pull up all the stories about it. They are going after literally everything. We already have the NFA, which is the National Firearms Act. The National Firearms Act basically makes it illegal, unless you have a special license or tax stamp, to own anything that is explosive or fully auto. So, no grenades of any kind, no rockets, no RPGs, no fully auto or select fire weapons. If you can squeeze the trigger, hold it, and keep shooting, it's illegal. So right there we have two massive swaths of firearms, or arms in general. Because arms in general is not just firearms. Arms is anything you can use to defend yourself. That means that technically, all the laws that we have against swords are also a violation of the Second Amendment. Can you carry a sword where you live? The answer to that is no. In fact, I would argue that where you live, you are probably not even allowed to carry a knife under a certain size or of a certain type. In most places in the US, you are not allowed to carry a fixed blade. That is to say, it doesn't fold in any way. So we're talking like a buck knife. But it doesn't have to be a buck knife. It could be a buck knife or a Bowie knife or what else? You couldn't carry Tonto. You couldn't carry a machete. You couldn't carry any fixed blade. And obviously not a sword. And in fact, if you get a sword cane, you can get dinged on it twice. Because not only is it a sword, which is illegal, it's concealed, which is doubly illegal. You're not allowed to have swords, you're not allowed to have spears, or polearms, or axes, or warhammers, or anything like that. If you can use it to hurt somebody, you're not allowed to carry it. And then we get into firearms, where he says that he wants to have all assault weapons banned. There is no such thing as an assault weapon. An assault weapon is something that was made up because they needed a catch-all term for firearms. Select fire rifles are used by the military. They're called select fire because they don't just have a safety button. They have a switch that goes safety, single shot, burst, or full auto usually. Sometimes they don't have burst. But they absolutely have safe, single, and auto. Select fire. That is your general assault rifle. Fubar says, didn't Biden say no multi-bullet magazines? But he's senile, so flintlocks and muskets. Actually, that's a good idea. If you have to load a musket, you have time to calm down. That is so far the best argument I've heard for muskets yet. But I just remember the meme where they talk about as the founding fathers intended. Somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the night. So you grab your musket and you rush to the top of the stairs. You see multiple people entering your house. So you run to the top of the stairs where you have a cannon. The cannon is loaded with grape shot. You light the fuse. The cannon goes off with a deafening roar and peppers them with grape shot. Several of them have been knocked down, but a couple still remain, so you shoulder your musket. However, your musket is smooth bore. So when you pull the trigger, and in a giant cloud of smoke, your musket fires, the bullet careens off and goes through your front door and kills the neighbor's dog. Now that your one shot is gone, you pull out a pistol. You fire your pistol and down one more of the home intruders, but one more remains. So you toss your pistol, fix bayonet, and then charge down the stairs. Yeah, as the founding fathers intended. Tuck says, fun fact, the carrying of knives are more regulated in many cities because laws against them get overlooked. There is no big organization against those laws. That is probably true. I don't think there is anything nationally that bans them, but there is like nowhere you can go that you can carry a sword. I mean, I might have to test that somewhere or do like a survey, but as far as I know, there's like nowhere you can go around other people where you can carry a sword. I'll do some research into that later and see. I'll post it in the Discord if I find anything interesting about that. So if you're not already on my Discord, the link should be below. Come join us there. It's fun. Anyway, though, back on topic here. So the Biden administration has been after all firearms. I did just mention assault weapons, which is nebulous and undefined. But, again, as Fubar said, also going after what they call high-capacity magazines, or basically anything that is more than a single shot. They want to go after handguns because handguns are responsible for most of the gun violence because they are small and easily concealable. But it's just easy for them to go after that because they don't want to handle the real problem. Of course, the real problem is cultural. We have a big culture problem in the US. The guns are symptomatic. The violence is symptomatic of the culture problem. People are going to find a way to hurt other people, whether they have guns or not. And I'm sure if anybody wants to ask Fubar42 in the comments about that, I'm sure Fubar has some great stories out of England where the banning of guns has done absolutely nothing to stop the level of violence in Britain. Like at all. It may have stopped the level of gun violence, but it has not stopped the level of violence in general. They even wanted to ban knives. And what happened? They banned knives and suddenly kitchen knife violence shot up. Because it turns out you can ban a Bowie knife. But it's much, much harder to ban a cleaver. It is a cultural problem. But they don't care about that. They want to go after the Second Amendment. Why? Well, we'll get to that later. In addition, we move on to number 3. Does anybody remember what Amendment number 3 is? Most people forget number 3 because number 3 usually gets ignored or glossed over. But number 3 states that the government shall not have the ability to quarter soldiers within your place of residence, whether that is your apartment, your house, your garage, your barn, your RV, whatever. The government cannot quarter soldiers inside your property. And so what happened? Well, honestly, nobody ever thought that they would see a Third Amendment case until COVID. Now, during COVID, when all the economies were shut down, people were out of work, savings accounts were being drained, everything got bad for everybody. One of the things that happened was people who didn't have an income, people who were living month to month, paycheck to paycheck, were at risk of becoming homeless because if you can't pay your bills, you can't pay your rent. If you can't pay your rent, you don't have a home anymore. This is similar to what we were talking about with cancel culture. If you can get rid of somebody's job, then they no longer have a place to live. Well, the government canceled everybody's jobs, including mine. And so, people were looking to become homeless. The government swept in, however, and said, I know, we got a solution for this. We can't give you your job back, but we can make it illegal for anybody to evict you. And so, the eviction moratorium began. Now, for a while, because here in the West, we are a very tolerant people. I know, if you listen to anybody during Pride Month, you will hear just how intolerant we are. But no, we are a very tolerant people. And when the government came in and said that now landowners and landlords are not allowed to remove people from their premises because of COVID, we said, okay, we don't like it, but okay, we get it. And so, if you were a landlord and your tenants either couldn't or decided not to pay their rent, which, by the way, one of those led into the other, because by the time this was up for discussion, many tenants simply refused to pay their rent, knowing full well that they could not be removed. Not that they didn't have money, they just didn't have to pay rent. When the COVID crisis was basically over and it was said that we need to go back to normal, people were getting back to work, and we need to open everything back up. They said, by the way, the eviction moratorium also is going to end because it was put into place for X amount of time. When the time limit for the moratorium was coming up, many people clamored and said, no, we can't let this end, because we'll end up being homeless. Because they had gotten accustomed to not having to pay rent for whatever reason, whether they couldn't afford it and they were living for free, or because they simply didn't want to pay rent and they got used to having the extra disposable income. So, of course, after there was enough clamoring for it, Biden said, I will finally just extend it, okay? To which the landlord said, you can't do this. You're now hurting us. We were hurt enough already by the moratorium during COVID. Now you want to extend it. We need rental income. That rental income pays for the taxes on the house and the land. That rental income pays for the maintenance of the property. Every burst pipe, every burned out light bulb, every crack in the foundation is paid for by rental money. If we're not taking in money, we can't maintain it. This is wrong. And eventually it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And interestingly enough, the Supreme Court came back and said this is actually a Third Amendment violation. It's not necessarily that the government is disallowed from quartering soldiers in your property. More to the point, the government is not allowed to tell you what you must do with your property. Whether that is who you have to house there, what you have to build there, what you're allowed to do on it. It is your property. Sorry about that. So, eventually, what happened was the moratorium was about to expire while this was being argued in court. And the Supreme Court said that, you know what? The Biden administration is wrong. landlords and landowners are allowed to do with their property what they will. And if that means that they have to evict people, as long as they do it legally, they're allowed to do it. Of course, the Biden administration responded by saying the Supreme Court is wrong and we're going to ignore them. And thus, Biden filed an executive order extending the eviction moratorium and told the Supreme Court, if you want it to stop, you're going to have to take the case again to overturn it. Knowing full well that so long as the eviction moratorium was in place, no eviction charges could be filed, and eviction usually takes a minimum of 30 days, meaning that by filing his executive order and the extension, he could buy people an additional roughly 60 days worth of time. Now, eventually, this was struck down, and eventually, property rights were returned back to the property owners, and people were evicted in large numbers from the properties that they were no longer paying to live in. But the important thing is not what happened to the people that got out. The more important thing is what the government did, knowing full well that it was unconstitutional and illegal for them to do it. They did it anyway. And if they did it once, they would absolutely be willing to do it again. So that's 3 of 10. Why don't we move on to number 4? So the Fourth Amendment is basically your protection against being investigated. It is the search and seizure amendment, essentially. You are not allowed to be searched, and your property is not allowed to be seized without a warrant. That means that if the government or the police or anybody wants to search your house, search your person, or take anything of yours, they need to first go to a court to get a warrant for it. And a warrant has to be very specific. It has to be directed. And it has to be in good faith. Now, all of these things have been basically ignored by courts over the years because if the police show up for a warrant, usually the court will just greenlight it, rubber stamp it, and say, go have fun. Well, this is an absolute that on its own is already partially a violation, at least of the spirit of the Fourth Amendment. But this is not that. See, the Fourth Amendment has been violated for a long time. We already talked about how the FBI and other groups like them were dealing with social media earlier. However, it went beyond that. Not only were they telling the social media platforms and big tech what they were supposed to be doing and what not to do, but they were also commanding that big tech hand over information about their user bases. When they would supply YouTube with a list of bad words, they would also direct YouTube that if they found people saying the bad words, they needed to turn those people over to the FBI. And this is just one example of many things that they were doing. They were spying on people's phone calls. They were sniffing at people's emails. They were assigning FBI agents to various public figures. They were going after people, American citizens, who they just simply did not like, did not trust, or did not want to be public figures anymore, and doing whatever they could to sabotage or destroy them. And even if they did need to, say, raid somebody's house and they needed a warrant, it was easy enough for them to get that because, well, the FBI wouldn't lie to anybody, would they? If they say they want a warrant, I'm sure they've got a good reason for it. Yeah. This is from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They are about as left-wing as you can possibly get. And even the ACLU, who actually, this is from back in 2013, the ACLU is kind of on the FBI's side right now, since, we have a left-wing government and the FBI is going after Trump, so they're kind of happy about that. But even the ACLU, when they were being a little bit more reasonable, recognize that maybe the FBI spying on people, maybe all the things that they do against American citizens, kinda bad. But again, these are people who don't really have morals and principles, so as soon as the tides turned, they were kind of all there for it. But if we want to be objective, okay, and fair, then we can ignore their hypocrisy and just take them at their word that the FBI has done bad things, and we'll run with that. If they're a good organization, then they should be good all the time. But if they're a bad organization, then they should be bad all the time. So what's it going to be? You already got the right wing in the country saying that the FBI is bad. If the ACL agreed with them way back when, and now they just disagree because they're going after right-wingers, I think we can all agree where the FBI stands. And that goes for the entire government as a whole. The Fourth Amendment has basically been done away with. Which will then take us to the Fifth Amendment. Now, the Fifth Amendment is basically your rights after you have been arrested, okay? So if you have been taken in by the government, you have certain rights. You have the rights to an attorney, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to a speedy trial, you have rights to, at least decent standards while you're being held. You have many rights to protect you as a person before you have been found guilty of a crime, but after you have been accused of a crime, okay? Otherwise, if you don't have this protection, then the process becomes the punishment. And the punishment afterwards is just gravy on top. But what have we seen? Well, back in 2021, we had a riot at the Capitol on January 6th. We do not need to go into this. If you're unfamiliar with it, do you charge rent for the rock you're living under? Because I could use a place to stay. But for everybody else who's not under that rock, there was a riot at the Capitol on January 6th, and afterwards there were hundreds and hundreds of people who were arrested. Now, many people, myself included, think that arresting them might have been a bit much, but if you're going to arrest them, fine. Arrest them for rioting, arrest them for trespassing, arrest them for whatever you want to, and let's just go ahead and do this. Instead, they've been charged with insurrection and sedition against the United States. They've been branded as domestic terrorists, which is wildly laughable. But regardless, they have been arrested for that. They have not been charged with it, but they've been accused of it. And that's the important part. Most, like the majority of them, have not actually been charged with anything. They've only really been accused of it. But where are they? Well, almost every single person of the hundreds that have been arrested are being held in the Washington, D.C. jails. This is a problem because the conditions that they have been kept on have been classified as a violation of international human rights, to say nothing of U.S. constitutional rights. There are many articles, like this one from Politico and several others, where people have been told about the conditions that they're living in. These people have been in prison, well, in jail rather, for over 2 years. They have not been arraigned. They have not had their trials. They are simply being held. Now, because they were arrested during the COVID times, many of them were put into solitary confinement. Many of them are still in solitary confinement. But we'll get to that later. They've been held in filthy conditions and inhumane treatment. So we're talking about, let's see, where do they list it? Following this. Aha. Let's see. Marshall's report, they described rampant abuses by guards, retaliation against prisoners, substandard food, and unsanitary plumbing problems throughout the central jail. So they're being held like this, again, without trial, without charge, Accusation, yes, but no technical charges yet. In addition to that, they have been denied all visitation because COVID policies still apply, so many of these people have not seen their families in years. There are even reports of people who have children now, whose children were born during the time that they have been in jail, and they have never seen their children yet. So if you want an idea of this, if you're a parent, imagine not seeing your children for 2.5 years. Imagine no birthdays, no Christmases, no holidays of any kind, no phone calls, no letters, because they're not allowed mail, because mail could be dangerous. The only people that these people have had any contact with has been their attorneys, whether they be paid attorneys or public defenders. And as we found out during the Proud Boys trial in D.C., even those conversations have not been privileged. Because they said they happened in a D.C. courthouse, any conversations these people had with their attorneys has been recorded, transcribed, and logged, and is available to the prosecutors in D.C. The Fifth Amendment has not just been erased, it has been inverted to create the most horrendous judicial system you can imagine. And it gets worse, because remember what I said about solitary confinement. We move on to the Sixth Amendment, which is the protection for U.S. citizens against cruel and inhumane and unusual punishments. See, this is from Time magazine. Time magazine is a famously liberal magazine. This is one of their opinion pieces, but even they admit why it's critical that the Jan 6 rioters' rights are respected. Even they recognize that there is a problem here, and a problem that if it is not addressed, it is going to blossom into something far, far worse than a few people in prison. Because as I pointed out, many of these people have been held in solitary. You have places around the world which have argued that solitary confinement is a human rights violation. And they argue that it is a human rights violation for convicts who have been formally charged and found guilty of heinous crimes. We're talking the crimes of rape, murder, just mass assaults, terroristic attacks. They argue that solitary is wrong for those people. When we turn around and apply this to the people on January 6th who were arrested for rioting and then never even formally charged, we can see how much more egregious this is when we add into the idea that they're being abused on a nearly daily basis, fed substandard or inhuman food, and with the sanitary plumbing problems inside of these facilities, we get a situation where even if they were found guilty of what they did, this would not be suitable for their punishment. And in fact, many of these people, if they were found guilty of things like trespassing, or unlawful assembly, or even rioting, they would have served their time already, and they would have been released. Which means that these people are being literally kept as political prisoners. They have no justice. They have no rights. Their citizenship may as well not even exist, because they're not being treated as a constitutional citizen is deserving. They are literally being treated as aliens to the country. And aliens don't get rights. You can do whatever you want with an alien. These people aren't even having their human rights respected. So what else do we have? Well, after this, we get into the idea of what about the rest of the rights? Because that was right number 7, or was it 6? 6, 7, something like that. The rest of the right, or 7 and 8, aren't really things that we that I've seen anything done to. But I want to get into rights 9 and 10. Now, the rights 9 and 10 are very similar. 9 and 10, well, first off, the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment states very simply that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, are not a list of rights that you have. Remember how I said that the Constitution does not give you rights. The Constitution tells you what the government is not allowed to do to you. Okay? That is what is called a negative right. It tells somebody what they're not allowed to do, whereas a positive right tells you what you are allowed to do. A positive right is very narrow, a negative right is very broad. At least for you. So the Ninth Amendment basically says that the Constitution is not an enumeration of your rights, and that any right that you have, you basically have a right to anything that is not enumerated in the Constitution. You are allowed to say whatever you want. You are not allowed to silence other people. You are allowed to do whatever you want. You are not allowed to search other people's things. This is the difference between positive and negative rights. The government has negative rights. They are not allowed to make laws against your speech, your religion, these things. They are not allowed to tell you what you can do with your property. They are not allowed to search or seize you, and they're not allowed to put you in cruel and unusual circumstances. All things that we see them doing, even though they are expressly denied from doing these things. Which is why we see this great shift right now, where people are assuming that they have positive rights instead that the government can give you rights. This is not true. It's never been true. But because people are not taught proper civics when they're in school, most people are not taught civics at all. They don't understand this. The same thing is true of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is the same thing but for states. It states that the states... Wow, that's a confusing sentence right there. It declares that the states have all the right to make all laws that are not hereby enumerated in the Constitution. So, for example, a state cannot make a law infringing on your speech. However, a state can make a law making alcohol illegal. The Constitution does not say the government can't do that. So the state government can. That is why abortion was such a contentious issue. Because when the federal government said we're no longer going to be involved, it went back to being a state's issue. And the state got the ability to decide whether they wanted to allow, disallow, or restrict abortion. Which is what it was always supposed to be to begin with. It was never a part of the Constitution. It was never a constitutional right. Technically speaking, the idea of a federal law is an anathema to the Constitution. The government is not supposed to have any law not enumerated in the Constitution. And if you wanted it to be a federal law, that's what a constitutional convention was for. But as I pointed out, we have strayed far from that. Doesn't even matter, though. Now that I have enumerated the difference between positive and negative rights and how they apply, does it matter? As I just pointed out, and I know we're running long on time here, we've been here for 3 hours now, and I want to wrap this up quickly because you have things to do and I don't want to take up much more of your time. But I just explained to you how in the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, 8 out of the 10 have basically been overridden by the federal government. They have been abused, broken. They don't even matter anymore. I want to get into this idea of sanctuary. This is something that has been popping up over the last decade or so, I want to say. The idea of sanctuary. Now, sanctuary is contentious. So originally sanctuary meant a place that you were safe. For example, the main room of a church is called a sanctuary. There are certain things that you just do not do in the sanctuary. It is a place of peace, it is a place of quiet, it is a place of respect. It is the sanctuary of the church. And in general, the land that the church was on was regarded as sanctuary. The term, as we're familiar with it, comes from the idea that if you were in trouble, you could flee to a church and demand, or at least request, sanctuary. And the church would protect you, because if you were being chased by people, the last thing they wanted to do is attack a church. They want you that badly that they attack a church, generally speaking, the next thing to come out are going to be the king's men. The church might be an easy target. Several knights are not going to be. So a sanctuary was a place that you could go to get protection from a certain thing. Over time, that has mutated. And now we have this new definition of sanctuary. Sanctuary being a place where something doesn't apply. Specifically, it came about in the 2010s, I want to say, maybe a little bit earlier than that, where immigration was really starting to ramp up and become a huge problem for the US. And what happened was, several places along the southern border, places like California, or even certain cities inside of places like Texas, declared themselves to be sanctuaries for immigrants. This meant quite simply that they were not going to follow immigration laws, and people who were on the run from immigration services, people like the Border Patrol, could go to these places, and the state or the city, municipality, or even just a building would not cooperate with border control and immigration. Quite frankly saying, you might have seen the person run into this building, but we're not going to help you. If you want to search the building, go get a warrant. And by the time you're done getting a warrant, that person will be gone. Because we will make sure that they disappear. Or, for that matter, go get a warrant. We don't care about your warrant. Not only do we not respect your warrant, but we will physically repel you if you try to enforce your warrant. This is what a sanctuary has become. You can see the similarities between the two of them. Since then, however, sanctuary has grown to be more than just immigration. There are now drug sanctuaries, there are now abortion sanctuaries, there are now gun sanctuaries, there are many sanctuaries of various different kinds across the US, but what do they all have in common? They all refuse to acknowledge the law. On the first one, immigration. Immigration is not determined by states. While every state is responsible for enforcing immigration, the way they enforce it is not up for negotiation. Immigration is handled at the federal level, and so every single border checkpoint is told exactly how they are to handle immigration through their ports. Which includes the fact that they must enforce immigration standards. They don't get a choice on this one. They have the border, they are a part of this country, they are a part of the Union, and they benefit from being a part of the Union. Benefits and privileges come with duties and responsibilities, and it is the duty and responsibility of every border state to enforce the border. However, sanctuary states and cities and such have said no, we will not do that. And as a matter of fact, not only will we not do that, but we will resist you if you try to. It is a direct defiance of the federal government. And it is an assault not just on the government, but on every single other state that is harmed by it. The fact is that no matter what Western country you're in, because every Western country is having this problem, the people who immigrate through one port don't stay in that port. They spread everywhere. So even though you may not be in a border state, you could be on the other end of the country. It still affects you. And thus, you are being harmed by another state's policies. The same thing is also true for things like drug sanctuaries, places like San Francisco or many counties in California, where they simply will not enforce drug laws. Again, drug laws are a national issue. The CDC, as well as the ATF and a few other agencies, I think, write the national policy for drugs. These other states simply refuse to enforce it. Abortion is similar. Although abortion is a little bit different. See, abortion was similar before Roe v. Wade was overturned. Because before Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was a general agreement at the federal level that things like late-term abortion were illegal, especially up to the point of birth. However, many states declared themselves to be sanctuaries where you could get a late-term or up-to-birth abortion. Since the overturning of it, however, those states are now free to do whatever they want, and many of them have opened up abortion as wide and as late as you want. And they have declared themselves sanctuary because what they have said is that if you live in a state where it is illegal, and you travel to a state where it is, they refuse to cooperate with any other state's law enforcement. They will not testify. They will not provide evidence. They will not assist in any way the state seeking to prosecute somebody who broke their state law by going somewhere else. Now, how does this make sense? I will explain how it makes sense very easily. Murder. Murder is illegal in all 50 states, but it is not illegal federally. Every single state has their own laws when it comes to murder. However, if you were to go to another state, commit the murder, and then come back, we have an agreement among the states that we will extradite. That is to say, that you committed the crime in another state, it is illegal in your home state, therefore, you're going to be sent back to the state where it came from, or where you did it, to face punishment. Or you'll face punishment in your home state. One way or the other, you will be held responsible for it. So what we have here is basically a refusal between the states to extradite, a refusal to charge, a refusal to provide any kind of material support in the upholding of the law. Now, what is this going to lead to? The only thing that it can lead to, that is going to be a breakdown of interstate commerce and cooperation. Because the end result of this is going to be, if you know that you have abortion illegal in your state, and you know that people are going to be fleeing to the neighboring state to get an abortion, the only way for you to stop it is going to be to shut down your own border, to establish checkpoints. Now, part of that is also illegal. You're not allowed to set up checkpoints like that, because that is technically a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You cannot be stopped, questioned, and searched for free travel inside the United States, or Canada, or presumably Britain. But as we already established, we've moved to the point where we're now ignoring the Fourth Amendment at the federal level. If the federal government isn't going to follow the Constitution, why should the state? This is the only way this can go. There's also things called gun sanctuaries. It's essentially the opposite, or at least on the opposite side of the political spectrum, where entire states have declared themselves to be gun sanctuaries, meaning that they refuse to acknowledge or cooperate with the federal government and their administration of the National Firearms Act. They also do not believe that you need a license for concealed carry, open carry, anything. You are allowed to have whatever firearm you want, whatever weapon you want, however you choose to protect yourself. Whether that's a concealed pistol, whether it's a rifle on your back, whether it's a sword on your hip, or brass knuckles in your pocket. Second Amendment sanctuary means 2A, unrestricted. Which of course has been called out for being extremely dangerous, extremely insane, but it's no more or less insane or dangerous than a state that will also not restrict any kind of immigration at all and allow anybody to pass, good people and bad. So we have a government that has essentially shredded the Constitution. They won't follow it unless it benefits them in some way. If it benefits them in some way, then sure, they'll follow it. But by and large, since the Bill of Rights at least is all negative rights, they just ignore it in general. And since they won't follow it, the states don't feel the need to follow it either. The end result of this is the dissolution of the United States as a union of states. Maybe we go back to a more federalist system. Maybe we come in a loose amalgamation, kind of like the Greek states. I don't know. But I do know that where it's going now is unavoidable. The Constitution held so long as people were willing to uphold it. Now that the people in the government are no longer willing to uphold it, it ceases to have any power. It ceases to be a significant document. You could wipe your nose with it, throw it in the trash, and literally nothing would change. Let's see. Oh, and I've missed a few comments here. Fubar says, every church now has perspex in front of the window so kids can't throw stones through. Things have really changed in 20 years. I couldn't imagine doing that. Maybe an abandoned warehouse. That's broken windows theory, literally. If you grew up in a neighborhood where that would have been unthinkable, then yeah, you wouldn't think of it. Tux says, quote, you can do whatever you want with an alien. Yeah, because that'll get taken out of context. Tux also says, I would argue the gun sanctuary states are following the law as per the Constitution, while immigration sanctuary states are breaking it. You're absolutely right. However, we have federal law that says that you're not allowed to do those things. So they are breaking federal law to uphold constitutional law. Catch-22, damned if you do and damned if you don't. Essentially, what a Catch-22, though, does is it allows the federal government to basically do whatever they want because they're justified in what they do, no matter how they do it. Isn't that the wonderful thing about that? So yeah, the United States is basically done, unless there is a radical course correction. I've stated this before, but I think the only solution for California is for California to lose its statehood. I think the only solution for California is for the federal government to step in and arrest the entire government. The governor, the cabinet, the legislature, the courts. The entire government of California needs to be removed. Because every single one of them is complicit in what California has become. The only problem with that is people are going to call you fascist, authoritarian, and dictatorial if you do it. And they're not wrong. It would be the most authoritarian thing to do to remove the government of California, revoke its statehood, and make it a federal property until things got back on track. The unfortunate thing, however, is there's basically no other option except to let them continue as they are. And so, it puts us in a bit of a predicament. Is this unthinkable? It is unthinkable. However, so many other things are also unthinkable. The idea that we would be here, in this place, at this time, having this discussion about how the Constitution has become absolutely and utterly meaningless, should have been impossible. It should have been unthinkable. But here we are. And so, unfortunately, that's where I'm going to have to leave things off, because I don't have any further solution for that. But we can go ahead and we can green this over, because we covered that, and we can call this done. Everything is green. We covered every topic we wanted, and it only took 3 hours and 20 minutes. I'm sorry, I didn't want it to go this long, but I tried. I tried to restrain myself. Anyway, though, I'm not going to keep you for any longer. So I hope that you got something out of this today. I hope that you can use some of what you learned here to maybe give you different perspective on other things, especially if you can learn empathy and abstraction. You can use that and take a look at all of this and say, if I was in their position, why would I be doing this? And it's quite simple, actually. If you wanted absolute power over the United States, you'd be doing all of these things. Really, that's all it's about. They want to have absolute power. They want to have a dictatorship over the United States. And they're going to get it at the rate they're going. When I say that it would be terrible for us to have to go authoritarian and just assimilate California, destroy their government, arrest all those people, would it be terrible? Yeah. However, if California had absolute control and authority over the United States, do you think that they would stop for a moment from doing the same thing? I don't think so. We've unfortunately gone way, way past the point of compromise, and now we're just kind of racing to the point of who will get absolute power first. And once they have it, who can punish their enemies more severely? It's a terrible place to be. But unfortunately, that's where we are. So, I am going to go ahead and call that good. I don't know what I'm going to be doing for next week. Probably whatever comes up in the news. I don't know. I don't want to be a news commentary show, but I have so many things to talk about. I really do. So anyway, I hope you got something out of this that was useful to you. If not, I hope you at least enjoyed the conversation here. If you'd like to hear more of these conversations like this, I'm still trying to do these every Saturday, at least so long as I can talk, because my throat's kind of getting... But subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when these videos come out. If you know somebody else who also might benefit from this, then share the video with them. I know Fubar said that they want to share it, so good luck with that. But otherwise, if you think that what I did had any kind of value at all, leave a like on the video. It helps me feel good. It helps me in the algorithm. It just helps in general. If you have any further ideas on it that you want to share, or if you have further ideas for future topics, leave them in the comments down below, because comments also help the algorithm, and we're all slaves to the algorithm. But otherwise, I just hope you enjoyed it here. I will see you tomorrow for the tabletop stream. We're doing samurais and ninjas, so if you want to do that, or if you like those, show up for that one. But otherwise, I will see you next week for whatever it is. And until then, take care.